No quick-witted intro here today. Chargers fans don't want to hear about it anyway. You know, about how as soon as they have expectations heading into the season again, the second best player on their team got hurt 3 weeks before it starts. Anyway, some devastating news for the Los Angeles Chargers, and right out the gate here, you may have noticed in the thumbnail, the Chargers now with the 14th spot in these power rankings for this deep dive series. And they do drop 5 spots. I originally had them number 9 when they had one of the best left tackles in the NFL ready to go in Rashawn Slater. He's going to be out. So a big blow. Anytime you lose a player of that caliber, that can be expected. But just showing the rankings here, that does mean the Washington Commanders climb up a spot, and then the Houston Texans received good news on the injury that we discussed in our last deep dive on Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. So the Texans team rating is going to stay put, but their team ranking is going to climb up to number 12. So with that out of the way, let's get into it. Obviously, devastating news for the Chargers. Just a couple days ago, Rashawn Slater goes down with a patellar tendon injury. Going to be done for this season. Going to be a long road to recovery for him. So Chargers fans might be a little bit down in the dumps right now, but I promise you, all hope is not lost for this Chargers team. Just a couple of years ago, we did see this team overcome a Rashawn Slater injury, and I think this team is in a much better position with the new coaching staff and some of the depth they've built up to persevere through this. But of course, it is a blow to the team, as we discussed. They dropped down 5 spots in these team rankings, which is going to make today's deep dive maybe all the bit more interesting, as there are going to be players that have to step up and other pockets of this team that are going to have to emerge and develop if this team is going to accomplish what I think should still be playoff aspirations for this Chargers team, despite losing who is, in all likelihood, the second best player on their football team. But as we get started with this Chargers deep dive, if you guys could do me a huge favor, please do hit that like button down below. It's a free and easy way to really support this series, support my channel. Make sure you're subscribed as well as we approach the top 10 countdown for this series. And lastly, make sure you stick around to the end of the video. Stephen Haglund of the Guilty as Charged podcast, one of the OG guests in this series, makes his return once again and gives us a lot of inside scoop as someone that's boots on the ground at Chargers training camp on a lot of the position battles and how they can kind of stomach this Rashawn Slater injury. So a great interview with Stephen. You guys are not going to want to miss that. But let's go ahead and begin. In this series, for every chapter, we go through each position group as well as the coaching staff with this team, and we begin that by taking a look at the offseason changes, asking if they got better, worse, or stayed the same at that spot. And this is going to begin as we discuss the coaching staff for the Los Angeles Chargers, where they nailed basically every hire across the board last year. No need to make any changes with this coaching staff, and at least for now, nobody has been poached. So no key changes and staying neutral from this offseason with the coaching staff. But let's analyze this very impressive coaching unit, led at the top by Jim Harbaugh, who came in and did everything you could have possibly expected for Jim Harbaugh. Put the khakis on, came over here to the Chargers from Michigan, and just built up a winning culture overnight. We figured it was going to happen within the first year, but it happened immediately. The toughness on a Chargers team that we have been critical of over the years of being a little bit of a soft football team, it was there right out the gate. All Jim Harbaugh seems to know how to do is build winning football programs, and he is very much on his way to establishing that here with this Chargers team. So much so that I have him essentially resuming his high praise as a head coach in the NFL from going back to his days with the Niners, but my 8th ranked head coach in the NFL. And you also see it reflected in the overall coach and culture rankings, which is a grade I give each team, which is basically the team's benefit of the doubt slider, how well the team's culture and team chemistry is put together. And for a team where that very point has been questioned over the years, they already rank as high as 6th to 12th in the NFL under Jim Harbaugh's leadership as primarily the CEO, head coach of this football team. Just been a slam dunk hire, as was assumed it would be when they landed him. But anytime you do go with a CEO type of head coach, that means both of your coordinators are going to be even more important to make sure things are running well on both sides of the ball. Not that Jim doesn't voice his opinions on both sides, especially on the offense as a former quarterback. But Greg Roman is where we will take this conversation next. The offensive coordinator, the offensive head coach, if you will. And this was certainly, of all of the hires that this team made last year, I would say the head scratcher, where myself and many, I think, at least beg the question of if this was maybe Jim Harbaugh with a little bit of a nepotism hire, Greg Roman having spent so much time with his brother John in Baltimore, and also just maybe leaning a little bit too far into this whole idea of that ass kicker, call it kneecap biting, shout out Dan Campbell mentality. Because let's face it, Greg Roman in his time in Baltimore was heavily criticized for not having a very modern offense that could really pass the football and tap into playmakers in creative ways and use modern passing principles, and many times held someone like Lamar Jackson back as a passer, and they would get to the playoffs and get out-coached dramatically by very good defensive minds. That was a question mark when they went with Greg Roman, and at least in their first season, they mostly proved that this was a good hire for this team. Really, with the flip of a switch, this team was able to run the football under Greg Roman's highly creative run scheme that leans into heavy personnel and really opening up the entire book of run calls, whether it's wide zone, counter, pin and pull, toss, you name it. Even the design QB run game, going back to Baltimore, he is excellent at that, all the way back to with Colin Kaepernick as well. They didn't do quite as much of it with Herbert last year as he was a little bit banged up. But there really are no questions if Greg Roman can design and call a run game. Those weren't the questions when they hired him. But that impact was felt here right away. And you do see for the offensive coach rankings, at least in the run game coaching category, the Chargers are inside the top 7. They rank 3rd to 7th with an A- grade for run game coaching, and Greg Roman has been able to bring that to the table. But on the other hand, they are tied for last in pass game coaching with a C grade there. Now, that's a little bit better than I had Greg Roman last year, where he had a C- grade. I don't think it was all bad. In fact, there were times throughout the season where it felt like they were actually drawing up some stuff in the drop back passing game, and some moments of basically watching this team on tape saying, okay, Greg Roman, I'll lay off you a little bit. Like, you're actually letting receivers go out there and get open and not afraid to pass the ball in early downs and spread defenses out and all that stuff, leaning into Justin Herbert, who can kill teams from the pocket. But it certainly was not all great. In fact, in my interview with Stephen Haglund, he gets into some really good points about some of the frustrations in the pass game design, so I will tease some of that out. But I definitely agree there were other moments in the season where you saw some of the spacing issues we certainly saw in Baltimore, where some of the individual players getting core targets in this offense were questionable at times, and probably most importantly, not necessarily having that predictive nature against some of the better defensive coached teams in the league. We especially saw this against the Texans in the playoffs, where DeMeco Ryans just had Greg Roman's number. So ultimately, I will give Greg Roman slight credit. I'm not quite as terrified as him designing your passing game as I would have been heading into last season, but I still think there are some concerns there, and there are a lot of better pass game designers out there in the league today. But with that C grade there, it's not necessarily that it's crippling this team. It's just you're not really getting a coach that's going to elevate the passing game, I think, like so many other teams are. And I think that's fair, but I would love to hear Chargers fans' reactions to those sort of rankings on Greg Roman. But what was really exciting last year was the defensive coaching with Jesse Minter as the hire here. And he follows Jim over from Michigan and very much is a part of that Mike Macdonald coaching tree that we have discussed in a bunch of other deep dives to this point. Obviously, the Seahawks themselves with Mike Macdonald, but coming out of that 2023 season, there was a wave of hires. Anthony Weaver in Miami, Denard Wilson in Tennessee, a wave of hires with teams around the league looking at what this specific scheme is doing, the success that they have had, and trying to replicate it throughout the rest of the league. And it really has become the sort of modern Mike Macdonald Ravens meta is what this defense is, and the Chargers very much run that here under Jesse Minter. The schematic parallels are obvious watching this team, and we did see Jesse Minter coach next to Mike Macdonald for 3 years in Baltimore. And when he took over as the defensive coordinator at Michigan, the series of events basically transpired as, okay, Mike Macdonald had come over from Baltimore, obviously the Harbaugh connection there, Jim and John. Macdonald coached in Michigan, really fused college principles with the NFL Fangio principles in that defense, created this scheme that I'm going to describe a little bit further. And then he goes back to Baltimore, dominates with it for a year, gets the head coaching job in Seattle. But when Macdonald left Michigan, Jim Harbaugh called his brother, said, hey, who's next in line to run that same system? That worked pretty damn well for us. And Jesse Minter was that guy. So it is very much a continuation of that system being implemented here with the Chargers, with their own sort of twists and turns, adapting to the personnel that Jesse Minter had to work with here. Which, by the way, was not special from a roster talent standpoint. My concerns with this defense were a critical reason why the Chargers ranked quite low for me heading into last year's deep dive, 25th, and they obviously shattered that ranking. But Jesse Minter's ability to get a lot out of not a lot with this defense, where they finished 6th in pass defense DVOA, 17th in run defense DVOA, those combined to make them the 9th overall defense, again, by DVOA, which is just a very good formula that can reflect upon the results from last season put together by Aaron Schatz and his team over at their FTN website. But just incredible results from Jesse Minter. And that is where the Chargers, with Jesse Minter's leadership here, find themselves with very good defensive coach rankings already into his second season as the DC here, ranking 7th to 12th for pass defense coaching and 10th to 13th for run defense coaching. Not only did he do a good job teaching this scheme to a combination of new players and having to sort through who was going to be out there for him, as it was a bit of a motley crew of a roster with guys they had kind of acquired off the scrap heap, young, like day 3 draft picks, existing veterans. They had to really put this thing together by the parts, and Minter did just as incredible of a job as you could possibly ask, especially for a year 1 DC. But we also know that the principles of this scheme are very proven as well. So let's describe the Macdonald system a little bit here, as we have with some of these other deep dives. And I came up with these 4 bullet points for the Seahawks deep dive, and I think it worked really well. So we're going to revisit this. If you watch the Seahawks deep dive, you might want to just skip ahead a couple minutes because it's going to be a lot of the same points. But it might be a good reminder anyway. And if you didn't, this was a really nice way to break it down. So there's 4 key aspects that stand out about this scheme. Number 1 is that from a coverage standpoint on the back end, it is very much that Fangio and even Nick Saban inspired coverage structure on the back end, with the idea of showing pre-snap to high safety looks, with the idea that you can really rotate into any number of coverages post-snap to cause confusion, where you can end up in cover 4, cover 6, which is going to be cover 2 on one side of the field and cover 4 on the other side of the field. You can get into single high structure, run cover 3, man-to-man, you name it. This is the modern meta that whether you're in a Macdonald system, a Saleh system, or a Fangio system, those are the 3 main coaching trees in the league today. I didn't add them all up, but I would say 25 teams in the league are doing very similar concepts. So on the back end, you're going to see a lot of that. However, one core difference you do see from all of the coaches in this system is that when it's necessary, they're not afraid to bring those cornerbacks up towards the line and even press a little bit more if they think it's necessary in certain matchups. One of the big frustrations with a lot of the Fangio disciples, guys like Brandon Staley and Joe Barry, for example, is they would run a lot of quarters, but play it with their corners constantly 10 yards off the line of scrimmage and just allow easy outlets towards the flat nonstop and just get picked apart. Well, these defenses typically are smart enough to, maybe they'll play quarters, but they'll have their corners at 5-yard depths. So it's not as easy to pick those guys apart. Or they will actually, if they have a corner to do it, play press man coverage to one side of the field. Yes, leave that corner on an island, but offer a little bit more of a tough physical brand of coverage than just playing 10 yards off all the time. So there's your coverage structure. And then the other core thing, which we really saw here with the Chargers, is the use of the 3 safety big nickel formations as a huge part of their base early down defenses. And this, I don't know if was intentional or discovered by accident with the use of Kyle Hamilton as a big nickel in Baltimore, but it has clearly permeated throughout the league with the teams that run this system, like Seattle, Tennessee, and here. But it makes a lot of sense because another frustration with a Fangio-style defense is that you're going to have to play a lot of nickel. You can't really run quarters coverage and pre-snap two high structures out of a base 3-4 or 4-3. It's just really hard to do that in terms of spacing and the types of athletes that you're asking to cover in curl flat areas typically. So naturally, all of these style of defenses are going to play a lot of base nickel, whether that's a 4-2 front or a 2-4 front, which is a 4-2 front, but with your edge rushers just standing up, or in a 5-1 penny front, but all with, 5 defensive backs and 6 members up front in your front 6. That type of defense typically is going to leave you a little bit undersized and vulnerable against the run. So hence why, as these Fangio-style defenses have permeated throughout the league, we have seen this massive ascension of the run game and just all-time highs for yards per attempt and run games throughout the league. But if instead of playing your nickel cornerback in those formations, which historically has been kind of the smaller corner, we've seen a lot of 5'9" corners, a lot of 180-pound slot corners in those nickel formations, well, why not sacrifice a little bit on the coverage end where you're already getting bonus coverage from the coverage structure and put a 215-pound safety in there as effectively your nickel player, your nickel corner, who does have to cover slot wide receivers, but tight ends as well. But someone that is more than comfortable filling the run, blitzing off the edge, that is still a pretty good cover player. Guys like Kyle Hamilton, Derwin James here. So the use of those 3 safety, big nickel formations, running these 2 high structures out of that is a key staple of these defenses. And the Chargers absolutely did that with Derwin James and their other 2 safeties in Elijah Molden and Alohi Gilman. So you get a little bit of the best of both worlds. You can actually defend the run with 2 high structures without losing too much from a coverage perspective. And then their fronts are also different. The way they coach their fronts is very different. Instead of having a very vast playbook of different formations and different names and rules for every different blitz within those formations, what they really want to do is reduce the number of plays there and just teach every member of their front the role and assignment on every play and from every spot. So it's less to memorize, which is easier for guys to learn and pick up and play fast. But it's also really effective for a couple other reasons. Number one is it allows you to just be super multiple and pick matchups and be moldable on the fly. But it's also highly effective in the sense that they can just throw what looks like to the offense completely new formations and pre-snap blitz looks where guys are lined up anywhere and you've never seen this on tape. You don't know where they're coming from. But for the Chargers or the Ravens or the Seahawks, all these guys running this system, for them, they're running the same stuff they've done. They've just moved a couple pieces around. And we do see these teams typically very efficient as blitzing teams, getting free rushers, confusing protections, not knowing where certain guys are coming from. And with this style, you're also able to move certain guys around and pick certain matchups. If you think one guy has a good power on power matchup or a speed on speed matchup, you can do that very easily in this system. So the way they coach their front makes a ton of sense as well, and that's very revolutionary. It's had success in every single stop around the league. And then the fourth point that really stands out about these defenses ties into that last point, but it is just how efficient they are with their blitzes. While, Mike Macdonald was under a Wink Martindale defense for so long, which is like the most blitz-happy defensive scheme you can imagine, Mike Macdonald doesn't want to blitz a ton, and all of his disciples don't want to blitz a ton. Most of these defenses are towards the bottom half of the league in terms of blitz rate. However, because of how they design their fronts, they are able to be very efficient so that when they do blitz, they catch you off guard, and they're not afraid, these defenses, to blitz when it is necessary, which can be a criticism of some of those Fangio-style defenses at times, is that they're a little bit too stubborn to just stick with their four-man rushes and win that way. These defenses in the Mike Macdonald system under Jesse Minter here are multiple enough to understand when the pass rush needs a little bit of blitz help and what that sort of confusion can do to screw up offenses, not just when you do send the heat, but to come up, show a bunch of guys at the line of scrimmage, and then some guys are dropping into coverage, some guys aren't. At the end of the day, it's still a four-man rush, but maybe ended up confusing the protection and getting some of that phantom pressure where even if you're sending four, a guy comes in unblocked because the offensive line slid in the wrong direction. So those are your core aspects of a Mike Macdonald defense that we very much saw here with the Chargers. So I know we can get a little bit redundant and repeat points on this Mike Macdonald defense, but I do think it's important for NFL fans to be well aware of kind of what's going on with this scheme, because this is just the beginning of this being the modern meta of defenses in the NFL. It really is the perfect blend of that rush of Fangio coordinators that we saw fail in the NFL and a little bit more aggressiveness with that to not just get nickel and dimed and ran on night and day. And we're going to see more and more teams replicating this system because Jesse Minter had success here with this. Miami, Tennessee, Seattle all probably outperformed their roster talent under this system. Baltimore continues to have success. And Jesse Minter himself is going to be the top dog on the market in terms of who's going to be the next guy to get hired if a team is looking to replicate this defensive system. So if Jesse Minter can have half the success he had coaching this defense again this season, I think we might see this as the last year with Minter as the DC here for the Chargers, and I would only imagine the Chargers would promote from within to keep doing it. Maybe like a Steve Clinkscale or someone coaching a position group, Clinkscales with the D-backs. But that's why we spend so much time on it. But with that, let's go ahead and move forward. Obviously, the Chargers are in great hands with this coaching staff, with maybe just a little bit of hesitation on the pass game design on Greg Roman's side of things. But we will next get into the roster breakdown here on the Chargers. Before we do that, I do want to thank the sponsor for today's video, SeatGeek, the #1 ticketing app out there on the market. We have a couple of summer months here, you guys, so go catch a ball game. We got pennant races, concerts. This is the best time to go see a show. Also, we got NFL preseason here. You got an opportunity to go get your tickets, go see your team compete, see who's going to make the roster, and then even get ahead of the market and get some tickets for the regular season as well. Wherever it is you want to go, enjoy a game, enjoy a concert, SeatGeek's got you covered with the best prices, the best app with the best user interface. Just look for the green dots and you are getting the best possible bang for your buck. And right now, if you use code TFG10 at checkout, you will save up to $20 on your next purchase as well and support my channel in the process. It's a no-brainer to go get those seats on SeatGeek. Thank you to SeatGeek for sponsoring today's deep dive. And with that, let's go ahead and get into the roster portion of this deep dive as we can now discuss Justin Herbert and the quarterbacks for this Chargers team as we look at the offseason changes, And no need for this team to make any big changes, obviously, but they did bring in Trey Lance in his 5th NFL season here. He is just 25 years old. So we'll have a small conversation about him, but I am saying neutral overall for the quarterback room here for the Chargers. But yeah, let's talk a little Justin Herbert here. And the turntables, my friends, because for years and years and years, I have had it at the Justin Herbert fan accounts on Twitter and just pumped the brakes on this idea that Justin Herbert is an elite quarterback, for example, in the caliber of what we see with the big four in the NFL with, yes, Chargers fans, Joe Burrow is better than Justin Herbert, but Mahomes, Allen, Lamar. I've pushed back on the idea that Herbert is just quite that good, and in the meantime, I've come off as a huge hater in the process. But as he shits the bed in the playoffs, frankly, and people are getting tired of the if man of Justin Herbert is kind of the new meme that goes around on him. Well, all of a sudden I find myself higher on Justin Herbert than consensus. I've seen this play out with a lot of quarterbacks over the course of the years. Dak Prescott was one of them. But hey, I've got Justin Herbert still as the 5th overall quarterback in the NFL as we head into this upcoming season. I think he's still fantastic. The definition of a tier 2 quarterback, something like a Matthew Stafford in his prime, is kind of the go-to poster boy for what I consider a tier 2 quarterback. And the definition of that to me is someone that elevates their team and in a 10-year window is someone you expect to win a Super Bowl with. Is he necessarily that tier 1 elite guy, which by definition to me is someone that as long as he just has an average NFL team, you expect the team to be in the Super Bowl mix? No, just a crop below that. But this dude was the reason that this offense was still as good as it was last year and why they were in the playoffs. Yes, he could have played much better in that playoff game and it was hard to watch. But you can't just ignore what he did on the season where he was tremendous and took an offense with Greg Roman as its coordinator and effectively nobody to throw to other than Ladd McConkey and I guess Quentin Johnston in the 3 weeks that he decided he could catch, and battled through injury early in the season and came out, led his team to victory plenty of times, 4,100 yards, 24 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, 33 big-time throws to 16 turnover-worthy plays. To me, still the 5th best quarterback in the NFL. And Chargers fans, while the Rashawn Slater injury sucks, I don't think you need me to tell you this, but having this guy here is why you shouldn't just give up on the season. Like, this team can absolutely get back into the playoff mix and beyond for sure. He processes the game at a top 5 level. He throws with anticipation. He has a top 3 arm in the NFL in terms of arm strength, and he weaponizes it too. The way he throws deep outs, and when he has those play action rollouts, or he's in scramble drill, and he can throw it cross body 50 yards down the field and hit throws that even NFL defensive backs just stop covering because they aren't used to a quarterback able to access that part of the field. The way he can rip balls up the seam, like, it's just unbelievable. He has throws in his bag that are not available to most quarterbacks in the league. It is essentially like Josh Allen, technically Anthony Richardson, Joe Milton deserves a shout out. Then Patrick Mahomes. I know Chiefs fans are going to come at me for this, but I think I would put Herbert just like a tick above Mahomes. But obviously, guys like Milton and Richardson can't do it with the precision of a Justin Herbert. So, just spectacular traits. He can scramble. He can kill you outside the pocket when he does use his feet. And I guess that does take me to the one drawback, in my opinion, of a Justin Herbert, the thing that to me has always kept him outside of that truly tier 1 elite quarterback conversation, as I've pushed back on all the Justin Herbert fan accounts over the years, is it's just as I watch Justin Herbert every game of his career for the last 4 years, there's just a little bit of something missing from him in terms of the pocket feel, knowing when and how to use his feet to extend plays. And every time I say that, I get flooded on Twitter with clips of him doing it, right? Stepping up in the pocket, in the face of pressure and dropping a dime over the middle of the field or rolling out and making incredible throws on the run. Like I said, he can do that. It's just, does he do that with the consistency of the top 4 elite quarterbacks in the league who just have that, the thing that every Justin Herbert fan hates to hear you say, but the it factor that you can really only quantify by watching the film on him? Some games he has it, and other games, like the Texans game, he just doesn't quite have the constant feel for the rush and know for how to mitigate that pressure when it is appropriate to get out of the pocket, when he does need to just kind of step up and drift inside the pocket. Again, he does it plenty of times. It's just there's weeks where he doesn't. And that's where it can be a little bit frustrating on Justin Herbert. It's like there's just a little bit of a cog missing in the machine inside of him, that sometimes something's just a little bit loose and not quite right with him. It's a tough criticism to have on a guy because it's not something he can pull up stats or analytics on. It's really a subjective opinion I've had on him, but it really is something that has consistently showed up for me with Herbert and continued to show up for me on him in certain moments throughout the season. It's not that it holds him back from being a great quarterback. Again, I've got him as the 5th QB in the league today. Someone this team can absolutely expect to continue to put a great team around and get to a Super Bowl here. Something that maybe could even happen this season. Obviously, the Rashawn Slater injury hurts this team, and especially when you have a Justin Herbert that doesn't always sense that pressure as well as some of the elite quarterbacks. It's just that margin for error and the probability that those moments that we described of him not necessarily using that space inside the pocket or using his feet when he should, those moments are just going to get brought up to the forefront a little bit more when you don't have one of the best pass protecting blindside left tackles in the league. Maybe Joe Alt can be that, but the right side is now going to come into question as well, that we'll get into. But yeah, still very high on what Justin Herbert can do for this football team. Fun to know that now I'm higher on Justin Herbert than consensus. I don't know if ranking him 5th is going to appease the Chargers fans or not, but it is my honest opinion of where they're at with him. And then the last thing I will say here is I am curious to see if, with Greg Roman here as the OC, if they want to tap into him a little bit more in the design run game. We've seen this in years past. Herbert as a design rush threat, as a red zone rushing threat, short yardage being a legitimate threat. It's not that they never did it last year. Herbert was 10th in the NFL in design runs, but it certainly wasn't as efficient as you could have hoped to see. And I'm not able to split up how many of these were QB sneaks either, but Herbert did average negative 0.13 yards per designed run. And it's possible some of those are kneel downs too. But obviously a net of negative 5 yards on designed runs last year isn't really reflective of the B grade I give him as a designed rush threat, which does rank 7th to 10th in the NFL. I'm certainly projecting more success with that here in 2025. Just because it's going to be hard to be less efficient than that. And most importantly, because he did deal with an ankle injury for the first, half of the season, basically. So definitely think they can get even more out of him there, which would be a benefit here. As far as the backup room is concerned, you got Taylor Heineke, one of the, kind of quote unquote more established backups in the league. If anything serious happens to Justin Herbert, though, he is really the glue holding this thing together, especially after the Slater injury. So the season would be cooked, even though Taylor Heineke is a guy that can get hot and get you a win here or there. Trey Lance here will be fascinating. We've seen some fun clips of Harbaugh and Lance kind of together. Harbaugh, a guy that's really been good with QBs in the past, and just kind of the idea of having someone that believes in him, someone with very similar physical traits to a Justin Herbert, a cannon arm, a lot of size, can get involved in the design run game. Would be really fun to see Trey Lance emerge. Not necessarily fun here because that means Justin Herbert is getting hurt, but could be in a spot where he's getting the right coaching and development. Just 25 years old, so I'm not ready to write off Trey Lance fully quite yet. But certainly not going to predict a late career breakout from Lance at this point either. But let's go ahead and move forward and discuss who Justin Herbert will be throwing the football to this year. Taking a look at their offseason changes at wide receiver and tight end. They were busy especially trying to get younger and more talented with this group, because this was a huge drawback of this football team last year. And I have them as upgraded at wide receiver and slightly upgraded at tight end. We haven't looked at the offensive line yet, but if there is the fear of like, okay, yeah, this offensive line's not going to be as good as it was last year, losing Slater, at least they're going to have a lot more guys to throw to here. So that's a positive. In terms of losses at wide receiver, Joshua Palmer, he's probably their biggest quote-unquote loss. He actually gets a pretty big deal from the Bills. I was surprised how much he got. He's been a fine wide receiver 3 type. I don't think he's going to be missed too much. Then you have a backup piece in Simi Fehoko. Losses in the tight end room include guys that didn't even play 20% of their snaps last year. The only guy that stood out in spurts was Stone Smart, but Hayden Hurst really was unavailable most of the season for this team. Bigger name, but not a substantial loss at all. And then Eric Tomlinson as well, I think was even a midseason pickup that kind of rotated in for them. So really no big losses with the weaponry here, but some fun additions. 3 draft picks at wide receiver, Trey Harris in the 2nd round and Keandre Lambert-Smith in the 5th round. And then Oronde Gadsden as well in the 5th round is a fun tight end addition here. And then some veteran adds as well. They recently brought in Keenan Allen. Welcome home. While he had some frustrations in Chicago last year, he's still got something in the tank. And then Tyler Conklin as well as tight end depth, a nice pickup from the Jets. So again, upgraded fully at wide receiver. And then at tight end, I said slightly upgraded. But let's dive into this group of weapons that, even though it is better than last year, still isn't ideal. But they now get a C+ grade, ranking 27th to 30th. I want to say last year, just off of my memory, they had a C- grade and ranked 31st. Does that sound right, Chargers fans? So heading into the year, we figured it was going to be a problem, and it was. And now they're much more in at least competitive territory with a C+ grade. A functional group for sure, though they're hoping certainly some of these young guys will step up, that the old man Keenan Allen can contribute, and that this could maybe even be a little bit better of a ranking by season's end than 27th. But the main thing that they have right now that they didn't have last year was the certainty of a go-to target in Ladd McConkey, who obviously just burst onto the scene as a rookie. And that's not to say I didn't believe in Ladd McConkey. We just, don't rank rookies crazy high in this series. We want to see them go out and prove it. Otherwise, we're going to get burned by a lot of rookies. But I was proud to say I had Ladd McConkey as my 5th wide receiver in last year's draft, which might not sound crazy, but the 4 guys ahead of him were guys named Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., and Rome Odunze. There weren't a ton of people that kind of stuck their neck out for Ladd McConkey as wide receiver 5, who I did have with a 1st-round grade on. And it was so fun to see him land in a spot where he could thrive right away, because he was so polished, one of the most polished route running prospects coming out of college that you'll ever see. And that paired with his rapid foot speed, his awesome acceleration, and just good speed, generally speaking, made an impact right out the gate. And honestly, after his rookie season, if you made a list of the top 5 route runners in the league, you're at least putting Ladd McConkey on an honorable mentions list, if not inside that top 5. The way he can dot you up from the slot, even outside, the way he can snap off a comeback route on the outside, really special. So his ability to separate early, get open early, and provide an easy access target for Justin Herbert, honestly, that's a huge reason why this team just might be able to overcome the loss of a Rashawn Slater, because that ball can get out quickly with a Ladd McConkey. But it wasn't just that. I mean, he made some really, really crazy catches too, mossing DBs in the red zone, down the field, fighting over guys on back shoulder looks. Like, that was an area that I didn't even know was in Ladd McConkey's bag as a wideout. He also had a great chemistry with Justin Herbert out the gate. That should only get better. I debated whether or not to put the up arrow on Ladd McConkey. I do want to at least pick my battles a little bit with putting those up arrows on these graphics, and not necessarily predict that every single young player is just naturally going to get even better. Like, I don't know that Ladd McConkey is necessarily going to climb up to being into that like superstar tier of top 10 wide receivers in the league. I will say this, if he continues to just win contested catches at a really high rate, he was at 62.5% last year, which is like, that's like unbelievable territory. If he proves that that is just something he's capable of doing every year, that would certainly go a long way towards me saying he's more of a true elite guy. And if he does end up stepping outside more and proving to be that guy that can really line up inside and out, stack guys vertically, and be a legitimate like Z on the outside on top of being where I think he showed most of his best tape as a slot player last year, like, you could certainly argue that the up arrow should be on Ladd McConkey. I'm not going to sit here and argue against it. But I did leave it off. Like, I think he's probably going to settle in as someone in that category of like amazing at what he does. Technically, if everything else gets built up around him, you're even comfortable if he is your best wide receiver, but not necessarily the true do-it-all alpha tier of guys. But that's enough like negative connotations on Ladd. I freaking love Ladd McConkey and fully anticipate that his production's going to stay up and he's going to be a core reason why Justin Herbert has players to throw to in this offense, basically. But then enter or re-enter Keenan Allen. And this is fascinating. He returns, obviously was Justin Herbert's glue guy for the longest time. The chemistry that these two guys have on back shoulders and, Keenan's ability to sit down in zones and all that stuff, it's big time. And with some time to think about it, I do think it was smart for the Chargers to bring him back. We have a bunch of young vertical threats here that are unproven. Ladd McConkey's your go-to guy, but you can't just have one guy, especially on have-to-have-it downs, 3rd and 6. If it's just Ladd McConkey out there, he might face, bracket coverage and double teams. And then what? Having Keenan Allen, who can still work against zone coverage, who can still win really tough catches as hopefully a second read for Justin Herbert if Ladd McConkey is covered up. Someone that can make those tough catches, move the chains, and be that type of player for this team. I think having that role in this offense, basically a slightly better version of what Josh Palmer was for this team last year. I think that was a necessary addition when Trey Harris and Keandre Lambert-Smith are still unproven. Will Dissly's not a guy that can separate, and Quentin Johnston is the opposite of reliable in those have-to-have-it situations. And I did actually bump up the Chargers' grade for weapons when they brought in Keenan Allen. They were a C grade beforehand. Now they're a C+ grade. So I do like the signing. It's a useful addition here, but it's not all positive here. I think it's going to be interesting to see how they want to utilize him and how he kind of meshes with Ladd McConkey, because these two guys do win in the very same parts of the field, most notably from the slot. Like Keenan, especially right now, and we saw this with the Bears, like he can't really line up outside and threaten a DB. Yeah, he can win a tough back shoulder comebacker and maybe win on a slant if you're going to line him up on the outside. But he does certainly at this stage in his career do his best work from the slot and always really has done his best work from the slot. And it's just like that's what Ladd McConkey does best. It's not that Ladd can't step up outside. It's not that Ladd can't step outside and have some wins and do some good stuff. But he is awesome in the slot. So I just want to see them do this right. I do not want to see them really taking Ladd out of the slot because they now have Keenan Allen. I don't think that's what they're going to do, but it is Greg Roman we're talking about, and I'm just curious to monitor that. I think you could actually see a drop-off in efficiency if that's what they want to do. And there were moments last year where Keenan was inefficient in that Bears offense because he is 33 years old. He can't really move like he used to. And he comes with a gravity about him being Keenan Allen, where he's going to find his way to get those critical targets on third down. I just don't want to see a lot of that coming away from Ladd McConkey, and there's a little bit of me that's afraid that it might. So that's going to be a big thing to monitor here is how they distribute the ball to these two guys, how they line these two guys up. They got to be smart about this. There is a needle to be thread where these guys can really coexist in a smart way, which to me is Ladd McConkey is your first read on any of those basically 3rd and 7 or less types of plays. He's running the slant, the whip route, the dig, whatever it is that you think is going to move the chains for you. And then if he's covered, I want Keenan Allen either working with him in the slot in a trips formation to take advantage of the attention suck that Ladd might have in those situations, or I want Keenan on a backside slant or a comebacker lined up as an outside wide receiver where he's basically the second read. What I don't want to see is in Chicago where we're forcing, 3rd and 4 whip routes and back shoulders to Keenan Allen to move the chains as our first read. So that's it. That's my only, pause on that signing. Hopefully they can, not saying they need my advice, but follow suit with my suggestion there. But then you have your vertical threats here. Trey Harris, Quentin Johnston, Keandre Lambert-Smith. And Quentin's a little bit more than just a vertical threat and a little bit less than just a vertical threat. But if you're talking about, all right, it's 1st and 10, we're drawing up a play-action shot play, we're throwing a deep post with Justin Herbert who can send it 70 yards down the field, and we want to take advantage of that. These are the roles, especially in the case of Trey Harris and Keandre Lambert-Smith being added here, that I think myself and so many Chargers fans have been calling for a long time to get that with Justin Herbert. And it feels like we got like little teasers of it with like Jalen Guyton at times. Was it Tristan Jackson? Is that the other guy that like had a flash in the pan season as the deep threat here? But like they haven't really invested in an actual like vertical hitting weapon like guys like Trey Harris and Keandre Lambert-Smith could be for this team. And if these guys can hit, that can really open things up for the run game, open things up for Ladd McConkey, and then create more explosive plays, first and foremost. So that is the defining trait of what Trey Harris did best at Ole Miss, lining up on the outside, running go balls, running deep digs, running crossers and slants, basically the DK Metcalf route tree at Ole Miss. And to start, that's really all you need him to do. So his potential within that role in this offense, at least out the gate, playing a little bit more of a simplified role with his traits, like his potential speaks for itself. But a guy with those tools, you wouldn't think would fall to the end of the second round. And there were just some like blips on his evaluation. Not every box was checked. For example, he did have 1,000 yards in 7.5 games last year, but almost all of those yards came against Furman, Middle Tennessee State, Wake Forest, Georgia Southern, and Kentucky, SEC team, but SEC team in brackets. Sorry, Kentucky fans, low blow, I know. But he didn't really come out and prove it against the best of the SEC competition he was going to be going against. And honestly, just going through the tape, there were some of those, like, I know this is what Chargers fans want to hear, but there were some of those, like, Quentin Johnston-esque moments, clumsy drops, not always working back to the quarterback when you want to see a bigger-bodied wide receiver doing that and kind of winning that leverage at the catch point. He lost 2 fumbles. There were just some of the sort of, like, football awareness and technical aspects of the position that you wish were just a little bit cleaner on tape. And those are your kind of holdups with him. If he's not going to work in the NFL, it's going to be for relatively similar reasons as to why Quentin Johnston here has not worked out. So not everybody's the same. We will see if Trey Harris can be different. He definitely has a chance to, but he's got to come out and prove it, certainly. And if he does, this Chargers team can really start to be talking in terms of now starting to have more of a completed group of weapons. And then I think it makes sense to talk about Keandre Lambert-Smith next. I really liked this pick when they made it in the 5th round. I liked Lambert Smith right around that range, early day 3 of the draft. Broke out in his final season in college, his 5th season, after 4 years at Penn State, where he really just didn't do anything. And that's kind of the main reason he fell, is just the career production wasn't always there. He goes to Auburn. He has a nice 980-yard season, 8 touchdowns, and maybe most importantly, he really came on late. Kind of like a poor man's version of the Matthew Golden story, where he was a transfer that had to kind of earn his role in the offense, and then by the end of it looked like he was really breaking through. So he definitely caught my eye as a day 3 type of guy that could really be a sleeper. And he comes in kind of the same mold of Trey Harris in terms of the types of routes he runs and can dominate in your offense with, as a vertical threat, getting down the field. Lambert Smith, a little more speed, less sort of size and contested catch ability, though Lambert Smith did come down with 50% of his contested catch targets last season. So even for a more slender guy, he was able to do that. And just a really nice double dip draft strategy from the Chargers. I love this. Not having the overconfidence that Trey Harris is going to work out, but if he doesn't, maybe a Keandre Lambert Smith can for us. And right out the gate in camp, Lambert Smith has gotten a lot of buzz for a 5th round rookie. There's a real hype train on him, especially at this time in this recording here. So we'll see if he can kind of keep that up and edge out a lot of targets in this offense. Trey Harris is going to get the nod there. And I don't think Trey Harris is having a bad camp by any stretch of the imagination. And there are only going to be so many opportunities to go around here, but in time, they're going to be able to sort this out. And I think eventually they have a very good chance of one of these two guys hitting in that vertical receiver mold that, again, they've been looking for and needed for so long. That could really just open things up for everything they want to do underneath with the run game and with Ladd McConkey. Then you got Quentin Johnston, who kind of falls into a nice wide receiver 5 spot. A lot of clips over the summer going around of him continuing to have drop issues. And that was the main selling point, I think, for Chargers fans when they brought in Keenan Allen, was like, hey, it takes Quentin Johnston out of the starting lineup. And I can't really argue with that. He definitely had moments in year 2. It went from complete bust in his rookie season to, well, he's got to play. He's going to have to figure it out. And then, there were some good games in there. There really were. The last game of the season he was out there, had probably the best game of his career. I was in Charlotte for that week 2 Panthers game where he made a couple of really impressive catches. There were some of those moments after the catch. He had 13 missed tackles forced last year compared to just 5 the year before that. So that was a big selling point on him, with some of the Deebo Samuel-esque stuff where you can give him jet sweeps and find creative ways to get him the football. There was a lot more flashes there. And I mean, the dude had 711 yards, 8 touchdowns. It's not like he was horrible. It's just there were some weeks where he was truly horrible. And one of those was in that Texans playoff game. 0 for 3 on contested catch targets, had a big drop, targeted 5 times for 0 receptions in that Texans playoff game, and it just left, I think, the sourest of taste in the minds of Chargers fans. So I don't think you just completely write him off, but I think the way the Chargers are handling this is correct. Make him earn it, make him hit the jugs machine, make him get out there in some opportunities as a rotational backup, and then if you earn more opportunity as time goes on, they still have a few years of cheap control on him. He's heading into year 3 of that first-round rookie contract. Then maybe we can reassess this in time. But now as a wide receiver 4, basically, I think you could do worse than Quentin Johnston. Not necessarily a reliable backup, but kind of the equivalent of having Jameis Winston as your backup quarterback, for example, where, well, if you have to start him, maybe you get a great game, maybe you get a complete dud. That's kind of where we're at with Quentin. Then you got Darius Davis, who is a just fantastic punt returner, probably the best in the league, and they do some gadget touches with him as well. That might be your 6 there. Jalen Reagor, for what it's worth, actually made some tough catches at times last year, but he's still Jalen Reagor. And then Brendan Rice is a guy that people are going to pull for. Jerry's son. I never saw it with him. It felt like he was missing a hitch in his steps, like some of the worst acceleration I've ever seen at the wide receiver position. Just clearly didn't get Jerry's genes there. Just laboring in his movements. And it just hasn't been there for him in the league as a 7th round pick. 5 other guys there competing for spots. But yeah, I think it'll probably be those top 6 in terms of the wide receivers. Then you get your tight end room. We can get through this relatively quickly. Will Dissly is one of the best blocking tight ends in the league. Tough hands. That's basically it. He is basically a 6th offensive lineman that you can send down the field that can actually catch. It's kind of Will Dissly, and he's a tough guy to get down after the catch. He's got his role within this offense. He's going to play a lot, and he's perfectly fine for what he is. Just not making a huge impact in the receiving game. Tyler Conklin as well is a very useful backup tight end. This team loves their heavy personnel, so he can do a little bit of everything. He can make tough catches. He can contribute after the catch. He can run block a little bit. Very nice pickup as a tight end 2. And then another tight end 2 here. Both these guys are going to play, I think. Oronde Gadsden II, one of my favorite sleeper prospects in this draft. So excited that he landed here with the Chargers because I think he has a clear path to get not just some early down kind of wing tight end work. We know that Greg Roman loves his heavy personnel, and he's got a history of using guys like Isaiah Likely and a little bit of Stone Smart last year, these kind of half tight end, half wide receiver types at this position group. So early down work, there's going to be some opportunities for him to be more of an explosive weapon in the play action game. But even if he proves himself in camp, I think he can earn some of the 3rd down work and taking Will Dissly off the field as well and provide a field stretcher up the seam, more of a route runner at this position, a trusted guy on corner routes and digs. I mean, I loved Gadsden's tape so much more than I ever expected. I think he's a little bit stiff, and he's not the fastest guy for an undersized tight end, but he does have that mismatch ability. He still has some speed in there. And he's just fascinating because he's got NFL bloodlines. His dad played in the league. But it's just not too often you see, a tight end this productive at the college level that broke out as early as he did. I mean, in his sophomore season, Gadsden II had 966 yards for Syracuse. And then 2023 happens. He looks like he's going to be a weapon again in his junior year there. But he suffers a Liz Frank injury, which is a really tough one to battle back from. And he did. He showed the mental resiliency. We know this guy has exceptional football character to fight through that injury, come back with a new quarterback in Kyle McCord, and have an even better year. 73 catches, 934 yards, 7 touchdowns, a trusted target in that offense. He came down with 60% of his contested catch targets on 28 such looks. And then on tape in that final year, he looks like he's playing at about 230 pounds. He looks more wide receiver than tight end, but he gets to the Shrine Bowl, puts on 10 pounds, measures in at 240 at the Shrine Bowl, and looked like one of the better natural athletes in attendance. He was dominant. I got to see him first person, up close and personal at those Shrine Bowl practices, and he stood out. And then again, continues to check boxes at his pro day, comes in at 242 pounds, runs a 4.65 40, which, no, that's not like in the 4.5 range you would love to see for one of these sort of undersized tight end types. But he's also like, he's bulking up, and he showed effort as a blocker on tape. He was really undersized against defensive ends and stuff. But I really think it's all there, man. I'm a huge believer, especially in the 5th round. He's already getting hype out of camp. If you're not picking up Oronde Gadsden in your dynasty leagues, you're just making a mistake. Not that he necessarily is going to dominate in his first season, but if he continues to just work at it and fill into this position, can he play at 6'4", 245 pounds, be an adequate blocker and a legitimate weapon in this offense? I really think so. So I'm just a huge fan. Definitely someone I'm pulling for, and someone I'm betting on here for sure. Even if it's not necessarily all this season, though I think it is possible for him to make an impact here. And then you do have one more piece that could be an upgrade in terms of the receiving game, and that would be a Marion Hampton, who did some really dangerous stuff out of the backfield for UNC. A lot of contact balance, smooth hands, Still has to, develop technique as a pass blocker and know-how of who to pick up and all that stuff. They'll work on that with him, but he has absolute potential to be something like what Joe Mixon has been in the receiving game throughout his career. Maybe not the most, savvy route runner or necessarily the speed threat out of the backfield, but can absolutely be a 3-down bell cow back with an impact in the receiving game. Everybody else, I don't feel a need to spend too much time on. Najee's a good pass blocker, screen threat, dump down threat. I do love me some Kamani Vidal. We'll talk about him in the backfield section here in just a second. And Nyheim Hines, if he's healthy, historically was a very good receiving back in his prime, but no guarantee that he's even going to make this team. If he does, that might open some eyes as more of a third down target here. But yeah, there's your group of weapons. Again, a C+ grade. They rank as high as 27th in the NFL. Chargers fans will take that for now, but you're hoping some of these pieces will hit, and this could be maybe more like the 20th ranked group of weapons, and that would go a long way towards making up for the Rashawn Slater injury. And I did ultimately put that wild card icon on this group as a whole, because I really do think this is the group that provides some of that upside that can help this team, reach some of those playoff aspirations. But let's now go to the backfield with a focus on the run game here for the Chargers. So this team made some major offseason changes here, seeing upgrades for sure in this running back room. They do say goodbye to J.K. Dobbins. He played well as a veteran plug-in for them last year. Also, Gus Edwards got out there for 20% of their snaps last year, but I think it's pretty safe to say this is going to be upgraded. I mean, Marion Hampton in the first round, every bit a first-round caliber running back prospect in a league framework where it's not always advised to spend first-round picks on running backs. Hampton was worth it. And then Najee Harris as well, before they ever had the opportunity to draft Hampton. I don't think they necessarily went into the draft like, we got to draft a running back. Hampton was just that good. But Harris was definitely a signing with a lot of excitement before the draft as well here. So now I do have the Chargers heading into the year inside the top 10 for running back rankings in the league, 8th to 10th with a B+ grade. And there is room for that to even go up. But I'm so optimistic about Marion Hampton heading in here that I'm already, showing a lot of respect there with that top 10 ranking. In that I do think he will be the lead back as a rookie, because he brings everything to the table that Najee does with more explosive ability. Najee does a lot of good stuff that I'll praise him for, but pulling away from guys at the second level is not one of those things. Now I do still have a higher rating on Najee than I do on Hampton, just because of the rookie aspect there. But with that up arrow on Hampton, basically me saying, I'm not worried about it. Full expectations are that rating will climb and that he will finish the season certainly ranking higher than Najee. Deep dive player rating aside, this was a draft pick well spent. Are there other aspects of this team that still need some work? Sure, we'll get to some of those spots. But in terms of getting a 3-down bell cow back that can literally do everything for you inside an offense that this team wants to assert their authority and run the football, yeah, he fits the mold through and through. And I understand fully why they loved this guy and wanted to draft him where they did. My pro comp on him is Joe Mixon. Can run between the tackles with authority, has the speed to get outside on outside zone. He does the same thing that Joe Mixon does, that I really appreciate, where he can change gears. If he needs to be more of that stop-start inside zone shifty guy where he's navigating rush lanes and making guys miss in the hole, he can do that. Slowing things down, absorbing contact, running with power and contact balance, he can do that. But if he sees a hole to the outside or gets to the second level, it's like he literally reaches down and changes that gear and can have that top speed that just burns past guys at the second level. So I see very little reason for pause on any sort of a Marion Hampton hype. If you're afraid to draft a Marion Hampton in your fantasy leagues, don't be. I just, they're going to run the ball a lot. Yeah, there's going to be some frustrating games where Najee vultures some touchdowns and stuff, but Hampton's still going to have 18 carries for 80 yards that week, most likely, and some receptions. So I wouldn't be too worried about it. There's going to be a little bit of that rookie year Bijan frustration in there where he's not quite going to emerge as like a top 5 running back, I don't think. But he is going to have some game-changing weeks for you because of those explosive plays. And his floor is just really, really high because we know how much they're going to lean into him. And then Najee, is probably going to get somewhere between 30 and 40% of the carries. They're going to keep these guys fresh. And that's also just really good for Hampton's long-term durability as well. If you're going to spend a first-round pick on a guy, you don't necessarily want to just beat him up in his first season or two. And I think especially they can be smart about this. They can give Najee some of those real gritty, physically demanding carries where Najee is super efficient at goal line, short yardage, end of game, grinded out situations. That's where I want to see Najee out there. I don't want to see Najee getting wide zone carries on first downs. And I think this team is smart enough not to do that. But I do think Najee can especially help this team close out games and drives in short yardage situations as well. He is still so good at breaking tackles and running with power and meeting guys at the second level and forcing missed tackles. He is still underrated as an overall running back. It's just, I think some of the lack of speed and the fact that he hasn't really taken that Steelers backfield by the horns, obviously didn't reach a contract extension there. He didn't quite live up to his first round hype, but he's still really good at what he does. And now as a backup running back or an RB2, he automatically becomes one of the best in the league. Did have fireworks blow up in his face? It's just crazy, unfortunate event for this Chargers team that can't seem to catch a break. Maybe that does actually impact his vision. I don't know. There's been some interesting comments about this whole thing. The beauty is, at least for the Chargers' sake, not for Najee's sake, but the beauty is, if that actually did hurt his ability to play football at a high level, well, then they can just go with Marion Hampton and make him their complete feature back. And then this team is insulated for potential firework regression and injury with Kamani Vidal, who I still have the utmost belief in. They were slow to really lean into him last season. They wanted to go with the veteran hands, J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. And I do think, especially early, there were some moments where making that transition from Troy to the NFL, the vision adjustment, just a little bit of time needed for Kamani Vidal, and it still needs to be proven out that he can make that full adjustment to the NFL. But they have been raving about him in camp. He comes out in the Hall of Fame game, looks fantastic. This to me was a steal in the draft with speed, contact balance, explosive ability, just really a do-it-all back coming out of low level of competition. I still believe in him. If I am the Cowboys or anybody that needs a running back, I am hammering the phones. What does it take? A 3rd-round pick, a 4th-round pick? I am that high on Kamani Vidal. Maybe I'm crazy, and that's going to look horrible in time. And unfortunately, it's going to be a while till we find that out, because as long as Hampton and Harris are healthy, there's not going to be much need for Kamani Vidal, which is why I would showcase him if I'm the Chargers and see if you can't flip that into a good draft pick. But heading into next year, if Harris is gone, because it was just a 1-year deal, might start to see some of those opportunities for him to really emerge. But still a Kamani Vidal truther over here on the channel. Then you got Hassan Haskins, goal line specialist. Jarrett Patterson, probably not going to make this team because he's kind of in that contact balance mold. Raheem Sanders is interesting to me. There's not going to be a lot of opportunities for him, obviously, but he has a lot of Gus Edwards to his game as a dude that can run. What did he end up running? 4.49? 4.46 actually at 220 pounds, and it shows on tape that speed train running ability. He's got he's literally a one-trick pony or racehorse out there, but, some similar stuff to a Gus Edwards. And then, if Nyheim Hines can be healthy, I wouldn't mind him being around here as a true kind of jitterbug back, because none of these guys really are that type. It would be great to see a Nyheim Hines come back. Very fun player in his prime. But there is your backfield. This running back room is definitely a strength for this Chargers team. They already rank inside the top 10 for me, and could climb a little bit more than that. You get into some pretty rare territory pretty quickly in terms of guys that a Marion Hampton would have to pass if they're going to rank higher than this. And I think that does go to show you just how high I am on him as a rookie already, in tandem with Najee, who I think, again, is very underrated. But, all right, let's get into this offensive line. Maybe the reason some of you clicked on this video is to see what the hell this unit's going to look like now that they lost Rashawn Slater just a month after he became one of the highest paid tackles in football, rightfully so, an elite pass blocker and a great run blocker, one of the better overall offensive tackles, offensive linemen, period, in the entire league. Just a huge, huge blow. Now, before we really break this down, let's revisit their offseason changes. So their only loss is Rashawn Slater there. Huge, huge loss. But their additions are Mekhi Becton, who they bring in from Philadelphia, Andre James in the mix at center, and then Branson Taylor, a 6th-round pick out of Pittsburgh. Needless to say, this goes from a group that was hopefully going to be upgraded to now being downgraded. We've obviously already talked about the -5 in the team power rankings, but the drop in the offensive line rankings, it might sound dramatic, but I mean, I do believe this. They go from what was my 5th overall offensive line down to 23rd, from top 10 in pass blocking to now top 26, and then run blocking they go from top 6 to now top 19 in the league, for example. So just massive reductions in their rankings. Still a serviceable group there, again, as the 23rd overall offensive line. They can stomach this. They can work around this. But we do have to talk about how they can do that and if there's a risk of this being a unit that derails this team's season. So now moving over to left tackle will be Joe Alt, who lived up to all of his hype in his rookie season. He is awesome and on a heavy trajectory towards being a perennial Pro Bowl franchise tackle type of guy. I do think Chargers fans got a little bit carried away trying to say he's a top 5 tackle and, should have been a Pro Bowler last year. I got a lot of that, questions in the mailbag and stuff like that. I don't think he's quite there yet. He was very good as a pass blocker, but there's still another, 10 to 15 tackles that were even better on tape. It's easy to get excited about a guy doing it at that level when he's this young, but you still did see him, get knocked back against power sometimes, which was a question at Notre Dame, and the occasional loss with his hands. All stuff that can get cleaned up and developed. And Stephen kindly points out in our interview that he put on 15 pounds this offseason, so hopefully can handle power even better. He's got an 80 rating for me heading into year 2. Already 81 in pass blocking, a stud in pass pro. As a run blocker, that's where, going through the tape, he's really good. Don't get me wrong, Chargers fans, but I did still see some gaffes in the run game. Maybe not always the full confidence to know who to pick up when he's climbing to the second level, or getting confused a little bit with a guy crossing his face off the line. Just little stuff, right? He's still a very good run blocker. Relax. I'm not saying he's bad at it. He's got crazy traits. He's got the toughness. He's got that dickhead mentality you look for with the crazy athleticism. This is a dude with just literally all pro, dare I say, Hall of Fame potential. And it's not that he's not on that trajectory. It's just he was a rookie. And this is nothing we wouldn't have said about Penei Sewell in his rookie season either. In fact, Joe Alt was even better. So we're getting there and moving over to the left side, putting on some weight. Excited to see, frankly, what Joe Alt could be. And Chargers fans should have no concern about this specific position. But I do want to kick over to the opposite side here with the right tackle spot now basically filling in for Joe Alt. Looks like it's going to be Trey Pipkins. And we've seen the Trey Pipkins experience. He's an adequate kind of Band-Aid emergency starting caliber tackle, but he just has glitches in his technique and isn't the best overall combination of athlete and physical traits, and he certainly takes his losses a hell of a lot more than Joe Alt took at that right tackle spot last season. So even if Joe Alt can step it all the way up and be what Rashawn Slater is, and I think that's possible for him to do that, here in year two. You are still now getting much worse play at right tackle, and there's really not a whole lot of hope that it's going to get better from Trey Pipkins. There hasn't really been much development from him. It would be pretty surprising if he was better than he's shown to be in previous years as a starter there at right tackle. And the other thing especially is as a run blocker, he especially is a guy that doesn't fully understand it, doesn't have the same tenacity or traits of a Joe Alton, and certainly Rashawn Slater as well is a great run blocker. So you're just getting reductions in efficiency. No way around it at right tackle. You're going to want to keep those tight ends to chip help more often, keep your running backs in to help. You're going to want to get the ball out quicker and insulate yourself from very questionable right tackle play. That's just where they're at. And that's who they like there. I still would be willing to kind of let Jamari Sawyer compete for that right tackle spot now that it's opened up in camp. Sawyer, to me, in his rookie season, played better than Trey Pipkins ever has at tackle. I asked Steven about this in the interview, and I'm going to let you guys hear what he has to say about how this regime kind of feels about Jamari Sawyer. But if it ever does come to that, I like that as a backup plan. And I would even go a step further and say I feel better about Jamari Sawyer out there as a tackle. He did it more on the left side, so maybe it would be a situation where Alt goes back to the right and then Sawyer steps in at left. But we seem pretty far away at this point from seeing Jamari Sawyer, even though he's produced as a tackle. But let's move inside to the interior O-line discussion. So very familiar faces with Zion Johnson and Bradley Bozeman at left guard and center. And then a new face there in Mekhi Becton coming over from Philadelphia. But yeah, Zion Johnson at left guard, great athlete, pretty good run blocker, and has just had so many struggles in pass protection. The flashes are all there. Right, he had a game where he was like locked down against Chris Jones, right? Am I misremembering that, Chargers fans? But he's had some good games, but he's had some really rough games as well. Just at his size, he can struggle to anchor. And it's just been unfortunate to see him not really develop as a first-round rookie that I was crazy high on. I don't know, man. I think it really is just as simple as it hasn't all come together for him. It's hard to point to one individual thing other than just a little bit of a lack of size that has led to him just being an okay overall player. And again, better in run blocking than he is in pass protection. And then Bradley Bozeman is even more split in terms of like, I like what he does as a run blocker. He's tough as shit. He's really strong. He's really always been a very solid run blocker, but his pass blocking deficiencies have been on full display in Carolina. When they let him go, he was a part of that Bryce Young rookie offensive line that got Bryce killed. And then he comes in here and again just struggles letting guys past him in pass protection. It's not that he shouldn't be able to anchor, but it's just never come along for him. It's something that's never clicked for him, whether it's just not having the sticky hands to attach on guys and pick dudes up, or if it's a mental problem for him. That could be a little bit of a reason why they flirted with Zion at center and signed Andre James. But they're kind of right back here where it looks like Bradley Bozeman's going to be the starter. I will say they do have Andre James as an emergency plan here. They pick him up from the Raiders. I do think Andre James would be basically the inverse, where if you decide that you can't hold up with Bradley Bozeman as your center and pass protection, you get to week 5 and it's like, we can't do this anymore, you can make the decision of, we will take the worst run blocker who understands how to pass block in Andre James. It's a backup plan for them that raises the floor a little bit with your weakest link for sure. So I like that. And I like that as an addition. But then Mekhi Becton at right guard, very fun signing. Breakout season in Philadelphia last year, just a behemoth, 6'7", 360 pounds, really broke the mold that has been a perception that so many NFL coaches and teams have had for so long, that 6'7" is too tall to play guard, that the quarterback won't be able to see over the middle of the field, that interior D linemen are typically shorter than edge players, and at that height, you're going to have a hard time winning the leverage battle. There's just been a perceived notion that you can't do it. And we've seen Mekhi Becton and some others around the league have some success sliding in a guard, and it really worked for Mekhi Becton, where he is just so big, dude. He is really hard to get through in those tight quarters, and that alone really makes him a good pass protector, on top of the fact that he's pretty good with his hands. He's got adequate feet for a big guy. Yes, you do see guys beat him with a rip move and cross his face, and he's still learning all of the communication demands of being a guard, and sometimes he will miss blitzes and stunts and stuff. But generally speaking, was very solid as a pass blocker, was a blessing for the Eagles on a cheap one-year deal last year. And then as a run blocker, he's good as well. Again, not always going to get to his landmarks as a big guy, not always going to win that leverage battle, but working combo blocks, especially like the drive he can get off the ball, is really impressive for a guard. And he's a decent enough athlete to pull and do some of that stuff with too. So a breakout season last year, and you could even argue that the arrows should be pointing up on Mekhi Becton. I'd be willing to concede that. My main holdup on Mekhi Becton, which was my first thought when I saw the Chargers sign him, of all teams who have, case in point, Rashawn Slater, horrible injury luck. My main thought there was like, man, the Eagles, who really value their offensive line, were willing to let Mekhi Becton go when it's not like he got this massive contract here. 2-year, $20 million. But were the Eagles conscious of the fact that they got lucky to get him the only season in his entire career that he's been able to stay on the football field? I think you got to be careful taking a guy that has been one of the most injury-prone players in the league since he stepped foot in the league, and just assuming, oh, well, because he now had one season healthy, that's going to be the norm on him now. And that probably makes him the biggest wild card on this offensive line in terms of downside, and that there is a very realistic world where he isn't able to get through the season. I don't mean to be overly pessimistic there. It's just a realistic outlook there. But if he has found a way to stay healthy, whether it's just blind luck or taking better care of his body or doing Pilates or whatever it might be, I would be willing to concede that the up arrow could be there on Mekhi Becton, that he's going to be even better in year two as a guard and kind of be really good on this 2-year, $20 million contract as he tries to kind of earn a mega deal in a couple of years. Like, if he can continue to clean up his technique and settle in here, there is a lot of upside in this signing as well. So that's where I kind of put the wild card icon on him as just a critical variable for this unit to really capture the upside there, but also the downside. If he does get hurt, Jamari Sawyer could play guard. Andre James could step in there at center. And Bozeman could step out and play guard. You are insulated for injury with like adequate options. Though Sawyer has kind of struggled as a guard quite a bit. He just has been much better as a tackle. So maybe that's less ideal as a guard plug-in. I prefer the idea of going with Andre James, who's been very steady for the Raiders. And then Bozeman probably as a guard. So it wouldn't necessarily derail you if Mekhi Becton got hurt. It's just you're not getting that physical force on the interior that he can be. Beyond those 7 names, it's good. You're 1 deep on the inside, 1 deep on the outside, even though you already suffered 1 critical loss on this unit. So it's, you still got adequate depth there, but you do thin out very quickly after that. It's a 6th round pick in Branson Taylor, who I didn't get to his tape. To be fair, this team has been really good with their day 3 picks, so hopefully they see something there. But beyond that, it's like undrafted types. Carson Barnhart, who I did watch at Michigan, not a good football player. Ryan Nelson, Nash Jones, Corey Stewart. It's just all unproven, undrafted types. They can afford 1 more injury, not 2 more injuries, which is pretty standard for most teams. It's just, unfortunately, the Chargers already kind of leading the race, if you will, in terms of losing guys on your O-line. Not the race you want to win if you're the Chargers. On the positive note, they are one of the best skill blocking teams in the league. They get a decent bump to their run blocking grade from the combination of Will Dissly and Tyler Conklin's a good blocker. So for a team that loves getting into heavy personnel, they get some contributions there. But let's wrap all of this offense together and talk about where I have the Chargers offense ranked. Even after the Rashawn Slater injury, they still come out as a top 12 offense for me. So that's good. That's a good starting point. It's not top 10 as they would have been with Slater, but 15th in passing game, 8th in run game. This is still a very workable offense. Just unfortunately, this isn't a unit, like some of these other teams that we break down where you say, well, they got like 3 or 4 things that could really go right and they could be like a top 5 to 10 offense. With the Chargers, it's like, okay, the weapons could be a little bit better, but I do sadly think they are pretty capped on the offense. Maybe Joe Alt and Mekhi Becton getting even better could, raise those O-line rankings up a little bit, and we could sneak this offense into kind of the top 10. But I do think, especially with that Rashawn Slater injury, realistically, you're talking about losing a lot of that hope that this can be a world-beating offense, which just means that they need the defense to kind of, pick up their end of the bargain again next season. So let's transition to the defense that managed to be top 10 in defensive production last year. Let's see if they can do that again, because if they can, this team could be in business, but we got some question marks here on this side of the ball to get to. Let's start with the defensive line. And as we look at their offseason changes, this is where we start to see some of those question marks come up. This is a unit as a whole between the interior of the D-line and the edge group that is making some pretty decent changes here, and not necessarily for the better on paper, in my opinion. With the interior of the defensive line, they let Poona Ford go, who was by far their best interior D lineman last year. He gets a 3-year, $30 million deal to play in this stadium for the other guys. And then they lose Morgan Fox as well. Not a crazy loss, but he was their leading pressure getter on the inside. As far as additions with the interior D-line, they pick up Jamari Caldwell in the 3rd round, along with some rotational pieces from other teams, Deshaun Hand and Naquan Jones. And then on the edge, they lose Joey Bosa, who is not the same old Joey Bosa for sure. It's not some tremendous loss, but it's not like they really replaced him either. They draft Kyle Kennard in the 4th round, who we'll talk about, but I do say slightly downgraded both at edge and at interior D-line. And as we get into this unit, to bring up the rankings right away for the defensive line, it's not a good defensive line. They rank as my 27th overall defensive line. Damn near concerning with this pass rush, ranking 28th to 30th there with just a C grade. And then for D-line run defense, they are much better. They rank 11th to 13th. Better in that regard, but still not amazing. The one saving grace here is that you do have 34-year-old Khalil Mack. And bringing him back was absolutely essential. Love that they did that. Now, we just said this team is now even more dependent on this defense keeping it up, basically. Do I love attaching any hope of that to basically a 34-year-old edge rusher still playing at the level that Khalil Mack played at the last 2 years for this team? I don't love that, especially for a guy that has shown regression seasons in years past, 2021 and 2022 at age 31 and 32 in Chicago. It really looked like he was starting to fall off, and then the Chargers have brought him in and he's found the fountain of youth. I'm not predicting regression for Khalil Mack. The tape on him is still fantastic. He still has one of the best bull rushes in the league. He has great swipes. He's able to get around you in other ways than just power. He's outrageously good against the run. It's unfair, frankly, that they still ask him to defend the run even as much as they do on early downs, but he still does it really well. Again, am I projecting that this is the year that the wheels fall off, so to speak? No, but it's going to happen one of these years, and it could be this year. So that's a little scary, but not a huge reason to believe that. He's a freak athlete. You would think he's going to be able to play into his mid-30s at a high level, and man, he is still one of the more efficient one-on-one pass rush beaters. And frankly, he alone allows this pass rush to still survive with a C+ grade, 27th in the league. But if he falls off or if he gets hurt, two things that are real possibilities for this team, that might be the point of no return, in that it might just be too much for this team to handle. So you do wish you had more to reinforce that as insurance. But for now, he's here. And as long as he's here, this group can be fine-ish. But the rest of these guys just don't get you particularly excited. I mean, I love Tuli Tuipulotu as much as the next guy. Loved that pick when they made it. I think he is realistically one of the best number 3 edge rushers in the league. He's an awesome run defender and a pretty good pass rusher. He's got some craft to his game. He's got some power. Has he won as a pass rusher with the efficiency of a legit starting guy? No. Just a smidge over a 10% pressure rate this season, about 11% last year. But I'll remind people, like, 10% pressure rate is kind of the baseline, like, bench clearing mark for, like, okay, we can put you on the field as a player to get after the quarterback on passing downs. Not necessarily someone you're excited about, but that's kind of like the cutoff point. So he's been, like, just a little bit higher than that. He was 53rd in pass rush win rate this last season, 82nd in his rookie season. Like, that's kind of where he's at. Low end 2, high end 3 rusher, and like probably a top 20 run defending edge player in the league. And that's going to contribute to some of those splits where I'm more concerned about the pass rush than I am with the run defense here with this group. But then after that, you got Bud Dupree, Band-Aid edge 3, can do a little bit of everything for you, can compress the pocket, can defend the run. He's fine as an edge 3, no complaints there. No one you're too excited about there. And then they draft Kyle Kennard in the 4th round, he's a good Bud Dupree replacement. As a 4th round pick, I have nothing wrong with that pick, but really no one I'm expecting to get after the quarterback at a high level. He's got a little bit of power, he's got a little bit of a cross chop, but projecting it to the next level, it just wasn't really his strongest projection. And as a run defender, I like what he did. He had some really good moments, especially against Armin Membu, defending the run. Like, I think, again, for early down, get you into pass rush situations, I see what they like in him, but probably not going to help your pass rush limitations there. And then you're into, like, undrafted, competing for a roster spot territory already. Caleb Murphy out of Ferris State. We'll see if there's anything there. He's probably the next favorite to, like, make this team off the edge, but very limited playing time in the league coming out of Ferris State. So you can see your concerns there in terms of edge depth, certainly. As a starting duo, you're talking about a, top 12, 15 guy in Khalil Mack, who's 34 years old, and, a top 55 guy in Tuli Tuipulotu as your number 2. So like a mid-range 1 and a low 2. That's solid, but the interior group is really a concern for me, especially from a pass rushing perspective. The run defense here is okay. Yeah, you have Tyre Tart. And honestly, I put the wild card icon on him for kind of similar reasons to Mekhi Becton, in that I actually think leaning on him, letting Poona Ford go, leaning on him to be your true number 1 D tackle, the film is there for him to be a legitimate starting piece that could finish this season with a bit of a breakout season and make you feel a little bit better about this group. I don't think that's outrageous to say that could happen. Not necessarily that I'm putting the up arrow on him and projecting that, but he's a guy that's dealt with some kind of off-field questions. The Titans really had no reason to let him go, but they did. I don't know if that was just a Mike Vrabel thing or not, but he wasn't a huge impact with the Texans where he went after that. And then he had a nice year last year where he didn't play a ton, got more playing time as the year went on, though. Started the year getting about 10, 15 snaps a game, and then worked his way up to getting about 20 to 25. So he's going to get a lot more playing time than that this year. Still going to probably start in a rotational role, but if things go well for a guy with a lot of traits, came into the league undrafted out of Florida International, he's just kind of a wild card player. I like that they got him back, but there's a world where he plays worse than he even did for this team last year. There's a world where he plays a lot better. So he is going to be interesting to monitor this year. Kind of a tough cat to pin, but I like his tape as a potential 3-down guy. He does everything pretty damn well. So he's interesting, but after that, okay, Otito Ogbonna, this team still likes him. Okay, he's a big body with a good first step. It's about the end of my list of compliments on Ogbonna. I don't think he sees the ball well in the backfield. I don't think he's great at keeping his pad level down, at getting off blocks with stack Pete shed technique. I don't think he knows really how to do anything other than get off the ball and try to drive a guy backwards as a pass rusher. But he played a lot last year, and he's probably going to play a lot again this year, unless, hopefully, Jamari Caldwell can take that step forward. And Caldwell's pretty raw. It'd be pretty impressive if he can surprise as a rookie. But I did really like the flashes from Caldwell, and I liked this pick in the third round. I think he's realistically more of a 2026 impact in a most likely scenario, but maybe this team can surprise there. It is just rare to see a guy at 330 pounds that can uncoil and lay into a guy in his bull rush and shoot gaps as a run defender too. His explosiveness is special for a guy that big. But sometimes he plays unbalanced where he almost comes off the ball over his skis, similar to like a bad run blocker would, and ends up on the ground a lot. And he needs to do a better job sinking his hips and playing with better pad level as a run defender, playing with more discipline. You see a lot of times where he shoots gaps and it's like, well, I mean, that's cool that you got in the backfield, but the offensive lineman was totally fine with you going that way because that's not where the run's going. So there's just a lot for him to learn. But when things did click for him as a run defender, you saw all the traits, and there's a lot of potential for him to be a pass rusher too. Again, like the pick, would be impressive if they can get a big impact from him right away, but 2026 and beyond, definitely will be excited about him. Then they signed Deshaun Hand. He'll be a rotational hard end for any sort of penny front, 5-1 fronts that they want to run. If they do want to get into base 3-4, which they did about 6% of the time last year, he will be that 4-eye defensive end guy. And then I would imagine he'll get in the mix as well for their base nickel in their rotation. He's had a nice bounce back. He's an interesting player. He burst onto the scene as a later round pick for the Lions and then completely fell off. And then he's had a couple of nice years, I think, with Tennessee in 2023 and then Miami last year. So a decent enough pickup for what he is. And maybe he surprises. You know, he's loosely in the ballpark with these sort of Poona Ford, Tyre Tart pickups that this team has had some success with here. But, you know, expecting a big emergence for him other than a, you know, rotational guy that can do a little bit of everything would be a stretch. They pick up Naquan Jones as well, who he kind of got in that shuffle with all of those practice squad journeyman pickups that the Cardinals were going through last year with their defensive line. And he was one of the guys that I thought actually did stand out with some good plays on tape. So I think for him as a rotational defensive lineman, you've got some stuff there to work with. You know, Hand and Jones off the bench, you could do worse. If they're starting, don't love it, but off the bench, sure. Then you got Justin Egboigbe. Not expecting much there. You know, Deshaun Hand would be that sort of hybrid end style player that Egboigbe was coming out of Alabama. So probably losing a lot of snaps there. Didn't show too much as a rookie. Scott Matlock plays fullback for this team and defensive tackle. And he doesn't do either of them particularly well, if I'm being harsh. I mean, to be fair, Patrick Ricard in Baltimore did swim so that I think Scott Matlock could sink. And now Travis Hunter can fly. Shout out to the real pathfinders of the two-way players in the NFL. Patrick Ricard and Scott Matlock. But then after that, you've got, roster bubble, undrafted style depth. So there's your D-line. It's Khalil Mack at 34 years old and not a whole lot else to write home about, frankly. And that's just as great as this team performed last year and as great as this coaching is. They deserve a lot of respect there. It is a critical position, defensive line, and it is a hard world to live in. But let's go to linebacker here. We'll start by taking a look at their offseason changes here. Not a whole lot of movement here. They say goodbye to Nick Neiman, who barely played for them last year. He heads to the Texans, and no critical additions for this team. So staying neutral at linebacker. But it is a solid unit. I mean, you are stoked about Diane Henley here, who I would say broke out last year, but could be poised for another level breakout into the sort of top 10 of linebackers in the NFL. I think would be the next step for him. I don't think he's too far off of it. Really a talented third-round pick in 2023 that has checked all the boxes you could hope for in a third-round pick, where he's got to earn the job first, then he's got to get up with the speed of the NFL game and deal with all of this stuff that NFL offenses are doing to exploit these linebackers. But he's really figured it out, man. And in both phases, he was a great coverage prospect coming out, someone that played receiver back in the day. He can see the field from a different perspective, and he's got fluid hips as a former wide receiver to move out in space. But to me, at least on film, it looks like he's bulked up a little bit from that college build that he had. I don't know if his listed weight has changed or anything like that, but he looks more full size to me. Certainly did on his NFL tape last year, and you see him getting off blocks and laying the hammer with the hit stick as a tackler. And it's not that everything's perfect. He missed 12% of his tackles. You still see him at times maybe a little bit slower to diagnose things, but it's all getting there, dude. And I'm just a huge fan of Diane Henley. Certainly one of the players on this defense that has the up arrow and the potential to potentially emerge as, like, let's just say a top 10 player at their position. We haven't done the secondary yet, but unfortunately there's just not a ton of that in this defense right now. Henley's one of those draft hits that's looking like a real promising piece there. And promising in the sense of, like, okay, we're not just talking about a starter. We're talking about potentially one of the 6 or 7 linebackers in this league that actually really impact games and elevate your defense. There's just not that many guys. There's this middle road of dudes that are just pretty solid, but if Henley can continue to become more and more consistent and become even more consistent as a tackler, we're talking about that type of guy. Now, what you're getting from the LB2 spot is going to be much more of a question mark. Denzel Perriman just had some big, illegal weapons charges that were dropped. So he's going to be back off the field. I don't know what the hell he's doing with unlicensed assault rifles in his car, but he's at least back with this team right now. Unfortunately, this is a guy that has missed a ton of time for injuries. He was hurt for this team last year. He's been hurt really everywhere he's been, frankly, throughout his career. When he's healthy, this dude's a maniac. Loves to hit, gets off blocks, breaks down the run. He can even jump some plays in coverage and make the occasional splash, though he's not the fastest guy or the most fluid linebacker or anything like that. He's definitely a throwback in the sense that he's going to fly after play action. He's going to be aggressive. He's going to be aggro as a linebacker, but he's really good. He's started to have a concerning amount of missed tackles over the last few years. That rate has skyrocketed. Whereas he was originally, when he was playing his best ball, like the last time he was with this Chargers team, and when he went to the Raiders after that, he was missing about 7% of his tackles. Well, we've seen that go from 13% in 2022 to 15% in 2023 to 21% last year. So maybe not quite as athletic as he once was, losing his feet out from under him a little bit. So, like, he's fallen off. Like, he's getting older. He's 33 years old, and he has had a lot of injuries to potentially slow him down. So what version of Denzel Perriman we get here in this age 32 going on 33 season is definitely a question mark. But he is poised to be their LB2 week 1 as things sit right now. Would I bet on him to be that guy throughout the course of the season? Pretty unlikely, between especially the injuries, but also, maybe regression could kick in where he kind of gets benched. I think the injury situation's much more likely there, but I don't think the regression arc is necessarily off the table, especially if he's, like, losing his mind off the field and his mind's not in the right place. Having assault rifles in your car is definitely unnecessary as a 10-year NFL vet. But if Perriman is unavailable, you've got a couple interesting guys behind him. And we talk about Junior Colson with Steven in the interview. You're definitely going to want to hear some of the concerns with him there. But he is definitely behind the eight ball. I will say that. And Troy Dye is poised to be the next man in if they have to go to their depth here. And I think Troy Dye is right in line with a million linebackers in the league that are these third, fourth round, second contract players that came into the league, oftentimes guys that played undersized linebacker roles, like quasi safety assignments, weak side linebacker roles, didn't really have to play a real linebacker role in college, had to sit and develop in the league. And then you get a few years of NFL coaching and things start to slow down for you and you can process the game at a much higher level and maybe you bulk up your body a little bit. I think we're seeing that with Troy Dye, who was a fourth round pick by the Vikings and one with potential coming out of Oregon. He actually, he wasn't Diane Henley as a prospect, but not completely dissimilar in terms of some of the stuff he did well and his size at 6'3", 225. But yeah, he got to play last year and certainly played his best ball. They certainly like him. He's ahead of Junior Colson on the depth chart. And while Colson, I think, is the guy we're going to get most excited about as the recent third-round pick out of Michigan, reunited with Minter here. Certainly myself and many considered that a steal in the draft. It does seem like Troy Dye is kind of the guy to keep an eye on there. And I really don't think it's crazy for him to have a potential breakout year here because we've seen it so many times at this point with these post-rookie contract mid-round linebackers. But yeah, then you have Junior Colson. Again, don't skip the interview. Steven breaks down some of his struggles much better and with much more firsthand eyes on this than I could. But I still think Junior Colson, the prospect, was a steal in the third round, a really good run defender. I thought he showed the right IQ in coverage. He's not the most tremendous athlete, but I still want to believe there's stuff in there. And even if he is struggling in camp right now and struggling to climb this depth chart, there is a very real world where Perriman gets hurt and some of those added opportunities might come for Junior Colson. So I'm certainly not writing him off at this stage, but it is looking not so great at this point in time. Then they picked up Delshon Phillips, who's played around, was on the Texans last year, and then he got some undrafted types after that. So ultimately, this is a pretty good linebacker room with an ascending, hopeful top 10 guy in Diane Henley, who's not too far off of it now. A solid LB2 focused on run defense, who's probably going to get hurt. And then you go to Troy Dye, who I honestly, if I'm a Chargers fan, Troy Dye's got to step in as he did last year. You're going to feel just fine with that. And then a fun prospect behind that in Junior Colson. So it's the 18th overall ranking at linebacker, ranking 15th to 17th for linebacker coverage, and then 17th to 18th for linebacker run defense. It's actually a B- grade for the run defense and a C+ grade for the coverage. Even if the coverage came in a little bit higher, there's much better depth in terms of run defending groups with linebackers around the league than there are units like this that aren't great in coverage, but still better than a lot of teams and okay at it. Highlighted by Diane Henley's capabilities there. But let's go to the secondary, where they did make some changes this offseason, especially at cornerback. A little bit of a surprise, frankly. They let Christian Fulton go, who was a good pickup for this team. Played 71% of their snaps. Was really the only one here that they could trust in a man-to-man type of situation, whether it was in man-to-man on a number one corner or if they're running some of those match quarters with him on an island. But they also lose Asante Samuel Jr. He's still out there technically for somebody to sign, but he just wasn't a fit here and has had a falling off. He played just 20% of their snaps last year, getting hurt. But not a lot of additions, unfortunately. They signed Dante Jackson, frankly, a journeyman veteran at this point, an okay addition, but not someone I would expect to outplay what Christian Fulton gave them last year. And then Benjamin St. Juste, a fascinating pickup from Washington, and then a 7th-round pick on Triquez Bridges out of Florida. And then at safety, staying neutral, where they were downgraded at cornerback. No losses at safety. They do retain Elijah Molden, and then they did add R.J. Mickens in the 6th round, so a little bit of added depth there. But I have this Chargers secondary as a very solid unit. They rank 21st to 22nd here with a B- grade for DB coverage. They are, however, in the tier 1 for DB run support, tied with 8 other teams in that top tier of units that do get legitimate help in their run defense from the secondary. Obviously a big asset, something that only a quarter of the league has, what the Chargers have in that phase. But let's start with the cornerback room. They really nailed it with these day 3 picks in Cam Hart and Tarheeb Still. Tarheeb Still especially really looked the part of at least a number 2 corner. If not more, we'll see. I think we're still sniffing out what the upside could look like on him, but I mean, he's an athletic 6'1", almost 200 pounds. He's quick. He's got decent speed. He can play inside. He can play outside. And right now, he is the guy they are listing as their slot cornerback, though their primary slot cornerback is mostly going to be Derwin James, but with Still willing to defend the run, with the length to get off blocks, and some of the twitchiness to run some of those short zones, as opposed to a Cam Hart, who's much more stiff and an outside-only corner, and a Dante Jackson who can't meet the physical demands of the slot. These are their 3 clear-cut starting corners. If one of these guys is going to be in the slot, I think they've pegged Tarheeb Still as that guy, and that makes sense. But realistically, he is their Marlon Humphrey. I mean, he's not on that level yet. Maybe he can get something close to that. That would obviously be kind of a miracle type of projection for a 5th-round pick. But at least role-wise, as someone that will play inside and out and have that flexibility and can do a little bit of everything, man, zone, play the ball, play the run, you name it. I mean, there's really a lot to like from his rookie tape, and the arrow is absolutely pointing up on him. Cam Hart is the other day 3 gem that this team had. He's the other guy that, kind of like I said earlier, like I don't want to necessarily just put the up arrow on every young player. Hart's the guy that, he was really solid as a rookie in a system that mostly just asked him to stay conservative on the outside, tackle, play a lot of quarters, cover 3. I think, the scheme did help him especially. And even then, we saw some uglier games from him. I do worry a little bit more about his athleticism than I do with a Tarheeb Still. Some of the twitch to hang with quicker receivers, some of the long speed to hang with faster receivers. I do think he's a solid player and a huge steal in the 5th round. But do I necessarily think he's going to be much better than he was in his rookie season? Yeah, sure, he can clean up some of the coverage gaffes and get a little bit better as his zone defender for sure. But he's already a very smart player, was a 24-year-old rookie. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy and Chargers fans are super gassed up that he's going to be this high-end number 2 guy. I think he's a solid option for now that realistically in time they might be looking for upgrades at. Would love to be wrong about that, but he's a physical player and a good presence as a CB2 in this defense. And then we're going to kind of put Dante Jackson on the back burner for now because he is frankly the 6th most important member of this secondary. This team played about 30% of their snaps in that big nickel defense. And I think that's going to be maybe 15% more this year because Elijah Molden wasn't starting at first. He had been picked up by Tennessee, and they had to kind of figure out if he was going to be in a bigger role for them in this defense. So it took a little bit of time for him to get the full starting snaps that he got by season's end. And obviously they liked what they saw. They gave him a contract extension. And then on top of that, both him and Alohi Gilman missed some time last year, so they had to get into more traditional nickel. So I think we're going to get probably closer to 45% of that 3 safety defense out there. Another 10 to 15% will be your base looks. So in all of those other nickel looks, and even in your base looks, Derwin James is going to be your nickel cornerback. And in base, that's where we're talking about him being the strong safety that comes down and, is on the tight end and that type of stuff. So Derwin, I think, is the next guy we got to talk about here as a half nickel, half safety. And God, we said it in this deep dive last year, and it could not have played out to any better of a level. Him in the Kyle Hamilton role, where he gets to just focus on being around the line of scrimmage, swatting down throws to the flat, blowing up throws in the flat, playing those shorter zone coverages, using those instincts and his reach in that middle of the field, sticking his nose in there against the run, and then, occasionally rotating deep as a changeup. But we put Derwin James on my breakout list last season, which felt weird to do. But after a few years in Brandon Staley's defense, where he tried to just have Derwin do everything, and it just became too much, either mentally or even like the physical demands. Like I'm not going to say he's a bad deep safety or anything, but Derwin James is Derwin James when he gets to do what the Chargers let him do last year. And for the first time in a while, Derwin is back into that top 5 safety conversation, really. 36 defensive stops, 4 passes defended, not incredible coverage production, but still pretty good. 6 sacks as a blitzer, and just the presence as a run defender meant the world for this defense, because it allowed them to be in these nickel fronts and still stop the run with him as essentially an extension of the linebacking core. So one of my favorite players in the league. I was so happy to see him get used to the best of his skill sets, and still 29 years old. I think we can continue to get this version of Derwin for the foreseeable future. And then the main reason you're able to use Derwin in that role is because you have these 2 other safeties that are, perfectly used within their skill sets. Alohi Gilman, who is, I would say, one of the smarter, overall balanced safeties in the league. He sees things really well from the back end. He's a physical player. He's a pretty solid run defender. Not a traitsy player at all, but makes up for it with his awareness and toughness. And he's their move safety. He can play some strong safety, can play some free safety, 2 shell, single high. He does a little bit of everything. Very much a linchpin for this defense in terms of role wise, because I don't trust necessarily Molden to do all of that stuff, though maybe we can get there. And again, we just love Derwin in the role that they were able to keep him in. So he's a necessity and a very stable, solid player, although not going to get you overly excited, although there's a few plays a year where Gilman sees a play developing and he's able to make a play on the ball, and you just kind of have these, okay, Alohi Gilman, that was pretty freaking nice moments throughout the season. But you also see times where he doesn't have the range to get to a spot, and maybe gets a vertical threat will cross his face in quarters and he gets beat deep. Like, it's not all perfect with him, certainly, but he's a very good player. And then Elijah Molden was a really fun addition here. He is their true deep safety. He's the one with more of the range on the back end, the ball skills, the ability to convert interceptions, and just in terms of being able to run the more physically challenging coverage assignments, like those single high, cover 3, middle of the field looks. Like, he's the guy that can do that type of stuff, and was also a linchpin in terms of them being able to run these style coverages in this scheme. These 3 guys fit the exact skill sets that you would look for in those 3 individual safety roles in those big nickel looks. So a really fun, frankly, starting trio of safeties here. And then we can get to Dante Jackson, who can come in, play off zone coverage on 3rd downs, and ball hawk and be an outside corner. He's a guy you can beat in coverage, but you got to be careful because he has incredible burst, good ball skills, decent instincts to read the QB's eyes, and can make some plays. He is every bit a kind of cheaper, maybe more durable, but slightly worse in man coverage version of Asante Samuel Jr. So Chargers fans should be pretty familiar with what you can get there. Not necessarily a reliable starter, but in that role, I think he could actually have a nice season. Maybe even has 4 picks and ends out grading out pretty well because he's not going to be in as many positions on early downs to get really picked on. And we look back and say, yeah, that was a decent pickup within that role for this team. Now, the depth behind that is certainly concerning. Jasir Taylor has played a lot here and showed some flashes early, but he's been mostly concerning since. He's an okay coverage player, but his inability to defend the run has been a real problem for this team. Dean Leonard's played a little bit. He could maybe be an adequate Band-Aid CB4, but don't love that. Triquez Bridges, I didn't get to his tape as a 7th-round pick out of Florida, but this team has earned a little bit of benefit of the doubt there with like the Cam Hart pick, a 6'2" corner there. Maybe he surprises. Another interesting guy here would be Benjamin St-Juste. I know Commanders fans are laughing right now, but for whatever reason, Dan Quinn just stuck him on the outside and had him try to survive on an island out there. That's not his game. I've always said St-Juste should make a switch to like a big nickel slot corner spot. Obviously, there's not a lot of opportunity for him there, but he is 6'2.5", maybe even 6'3", with great length and like rare quickness for his size. He's got poor long speed, but I've always liked him in the slot because he tackles well, and his skill set I feel like always would translate best there. But within his time in Washington, they just haven't really tried him there too much. When they did, I think he played his best football in like, I want to say it was 2022. He played a little bit there, but I think he's certainly their type. I'm not saying you would take away Derwin's snaps there, but maybe Gilman or Molden or Derwin James get hurt and you want, say, to move Derwin back, or you need to replace someone in that nickel spot. I would be very fascinated with St-Juste in that nickel spot as a bigger slot corner that could contribute against the run and all that. And then you've got 4 undrafted rookies trying to duke it out. Probably none of them will make the team. And then with your safety depth, Tony Jefferson came in with this Ravens-inspired staff, and he played well. At his age, was impressive. He's back again. He kind of like came out of retirement, right, last year, but ended up playing 261 snaps and got on the mix when they had all those safety injuries. And then R.J. Mickens, a 6th-round pick out of Clemson. He's fascinating. I put the eyeball emojis on him because he had a 5-year stretch at Clemson where he was very stable but not standout at all. And then in the last 5 games of his career, he registered 6 passes defended. To put that in perspective, he had 14 in his 5-year career. So 6 of those came in the last 5 games. And then he did come out and run a 4.49 at the combine, and he had 41.5-inch vertical jump. I didn't see that explosiveness on tape. I really didn't. But it's good to know it's at least in there. So he's at least fascinating in the sense of like, did something click, and are there real athletic traits to tap into there? So if he is kind of a very late breakout and maybe a bit of a sleeper, definitely worth the 6th-round pick that they spent on him. Not a whole lot of depth to get into after that. So, as we tie all this together, I have the Chargers as the 17th overall defense. That is obviously a bit of a step back from where they were 9th overall last year. I still think as we went through this unit, they have some pockets of talent, but on paper, they would be a candidate to regress a little bit. If you go year to year, it's not automatic that you were top 10 in defense, especially defense is a volatile metric. It certainly is not automatic that you can repeat as a top 10 defense. The schedule changes, your roster changes, teams adjust to what you were doing, like everything changes. So on paper, they got to prove that they can do it again, especially from a pass defense standpoint where they don't really have lockdown corners and their pass rush is Khalil Mack or bust. I've got them 23rd for pass defense. Run defense, I'm a lot less worried because of the Harbaugh factor, the culture factor, the run defense coaching, the help they get from the secondary. They at least have a nice rotation of D linemen. Their linebackers play the run. I'm much less worried. They rank 10th for run defense for me. And overall, 17th is a very good, respectable ranking for this defense. But is that enough with the 12th overall offense now to have the confidence to say that, like, yeah, we're going to be better than last year. I mean, the reality is every team in this series, outside of arguably New Orleans, and even they got better in some areas, but every team is positioning themselves to be better than they were last year. Are the Chargers now doing that after they lost, sadly, the second best player on this team by ratings in this series, the highest rated player for me with Rashawn Slater? But this offensive line was going to be the defining strength of this team outside of Justin Herbert, which you still got Justin Herbert. It's not all over, but you lose that offensive line. Let's face it, you already didn't have the most exciting offseason. They lost players in free agency. They didn't really sign anyone. A couple nice pieces for sure, but nobody would come out and say the Chargers won free agency. I'm not here to bang on their draft, but everybody adds a new draft to the table, and you're talking about, a first-round running back and then a bunch of question marks that you're hopeful for, but nothing proven there. So, like, for example, when we talk about all these teams having those pivotal factors, those exciting pockets of the team that you can attach and say, like, these are the areas that could really go right for this team. And if they do, like, there's a lot of upside here and things could really project better than we have it right now. With the Chargers, like, honestly, you got to really squint to find those pieces. Like, I think the weapons stand out there with a young pick and Trey Harris, Keandre Lambert-Smith. How does Keenan Allen mesh here? Nice additions, but even then, like, there's a lot of other groups of weapons that we've broken down here where there's a lot more potential and expectations than that collection of guys. And then after that, you're like, all right, can Mekhi Becton stay healthy? Does Troy Dye emerge in year 6? Can our 5th round rookie from last year, Tarheeb, still play even better than being one of the biggest surprising young players in the league last year? Can Tyre Tart be a stud for us? What about our 3rd round pick, Jamari Caldwell? Can he figure it out quickly? Like, it is hard to really look at this team and not see a very high floor team with exceptional culture, great coaching outside of the passing game, a really good quarterback that is, of course, going to keep this team in the mix, but a team that, with major questions at pass rush, is due for some regression on defense and just doesn't have a ton of pockets of excitement on this roster. It gets a little bit harder when you don't have that offensive line to come home and hang your hat on. Now, we're jumping the gun a little bit here. We haven't talked special teams. This is a very good special teams. They come out as my 4th overall special teams. Cameron Dicker has been a godsend here. J.K. Scott has been awesome. They've graded out Dicker the 7th kicker in the league per PFF the last 2 years. J.K. Scott, the 6th punter in the league. They have maybe the best punt returner in Darius Davis. They have a great culture here. This is yet another strength on this team, is the special teams. Maybe that raises the floor a little bit too. But we are not done here. Do not go anywhere. I am now going to bring in Steven from the Guilty as Charged podcast, who has so much great insight to bring to the table here on some of these heavier hitting questions on this team. And then when I come back, we will get into this Chargers schedule that might be another saving grace of hope for this Chargers team. But before we get there, I hope you guys enjoy my interview with Steven Haglund of the Guilty as Charged podcast. Steven, welcome back. It is Chargers Deep Dive season, sooner than I think we both were hoping for here. Unfortunately, I let you know that the Rashawn Slater injury has dropped them from what was going to be a top 10 spot, number 9, now to 14. So we unfortunately have some bad news to react to here. But other than that, how you doing, buddy? Welcome back.
I'm doing good. This is kind of like my annual, date where I kind of look forward to, being that much closer towards the NFL season. Obviously would have loved to do a top 10 talk about the Chargers and not talk about a devastating injury. But it is what it is. Excited to be here as always with you here, Marcus.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit about kind of how the season ended last year. I think it was like looking back on the year, very positive reflection on what happened last year. You know, it always hurts to lose in the playoffs, obviously, but what were some of your main takeaways with kind of what led to the Charger season ending last year in that
Yeah.
playoff loss? Obviously, a lot of people are going to point to the offensive line, and you can totally get into that as well. But were there any other aspects as well, in addition to some of the O line woes that could have led to that loss?
I mean, if you're talking about like, portioning that blame out for that loss and the way that it happened, I think you have to start specifically with the interior offensive line. Unfortunately, that day also, Rashawn Slater and Joe Alt had their worst games of the season.
Mm.
Credit to Will Anderson and Daniil Hunter for that. But it was just kind of, it started there and then just went, and steamrolled from there. And essentially everybody on offense except for Lad McConkey played their worst game of the season. And again, the Texans deserve a lot of credit for that. They put a lot of the Chargers players into positions where they are weakest. Zion Johnson and Bradley Bozeman really struggled all season long to pick up stunts, and they threw a ton of stunts at those two. Joe Alt specifically last year as a rookie kind of struggled with handling speed to power rushers from rushers who could match his length. And Daniil Hunter is one of the longest edge rushers in the league. So it was an unfortunate, kind of perfect storm for the Chargers offense where everybody had their worst day. And then that, obviously forced Justin Herbert to have his worst day where he was just pushing the ball downfield in a really uncharacteristic manner where he was taking a lot more chances and making poor decisions. And so people obviously nationally have made that game exclusively about Herbert. But if you look at the season as a whole, he threw 3 interceptions and then he threw 4 in the postseason game because he was not being protected. He was pressured on 50% of his dropbacks and quick pressure on like 40% of those 50%. So the offensive line was dominated. They could not run the ball. The non-Lad McConkey receivers were completely non-existent. So it just was a perfect storm for the offense. I thought the defense played like okay. Nico Collins had some moments, but it just didn't matter. The defense could have played a perfect game and they still would have lost because the offense was just completely, head over heels essentially.
Was there any? Yeah, it's not just that game, but were there any Greg Roman frustrations
Oh
throughout the
yeah.
season? Like what's your kind of reaction from I guess that game and the season as a whole with his performance last year?
My biggest frustration was like the third down on red zone situation play calling. It just was very redundant, and there was a lot of situations where there's just a lot of like pure drop back pass. And when you are coaching an offense with Quentin Johnson as the wide receiver 2 and Will Dissly as your tight end 1, and J.K. Dobbins as your running back 1, who's a good running back, but pass catching has never really been his thing. There was just a real like disconnect of this is our roster. This is what we want to do on third downs. There were timing issues all season long, players running the same routes, players running into each other, players not running the proper depth. So it was the same kind of issues that we've always heard about Greg Roman.
Yeah.
When they were on their game, like it looks good and everything was working off of the run game and play action and stuff like that. Like the Greg Roman staples always look good. But when it comes to like traditional passing concepts, there's just it's not coached well on the board. It looks like it's not practiced well, and that obviously has been an issue still this week. When I was at training camp practice, and they're running a mesh dagger concept with Tucker Fisk, who weighs 280 pounds, as like the main read, and it's just like, dude, like that, just like nobody's out here doing that stuff. Like his passing offense still looks like he's in 2010 at Stanford, and it's just really frustrating to watch.
Yeah, totally. All right, so let's we'll eventually become more positive. I hope as this goes on, but let's talk
Yeah,
about the Slater injury. I did see they came out a couple hours ago and said Alt's going to move to left tackle, which I think was expected.
yeah.
But yeah, how does this injury kind of change the makeup of this offensive line and your expectations for kind of the season on this team?
In terms of the offensive line, obviously losing a player like Rashawn is just a real gut punch. I think the Chargers entered this offseason feeling like they had the best tackle duo in the league. It's certainly the AFC. And so you're able to build essentially an entire offensive game plan around that. And the type of athleticism and pocket pushing or pocket setting ability that you get from those two tackles just allows you a lot of flexibility in a variety of different ways. And so the Chargers decided to keep Trey Pipkins this offseason, despite, having a real easy out in his contract. They could have saved $8 million, but if they wanted to cut him, the guard experience for him last season did not go well. And so I think a lot of people thought they would be justified in doing that. They decided to keep him as the swing tackle. And now they're really fortunate that they have a player like him who's played 3,000 career snaps, most of them at right tackle. At moments has looked like he could be a solid starting right tackle. So the Chargers are a little bit more fortunate here, whereas other teams, if they lose, a left tackle of this caliber, like the Bucs are kind of going through this right now with Tristan Wirfs, you're going immediately from an elite left tackle to, a subpar left tackle, where the Chargers are just going to kick Joe Alt over. Not that it's going to be seamless, but I fully expect Joe Alt to be in the Pro Bowl conversation this year. He's added, 15 pounds of muscle from this last offseason. Looks great. So purely at left tackle, I don't think there will be that much drop off, as crazy as that is to say. But at right tackle, you're going from projecting for Joe Alt to, Trey Pipkins. That's a big drop off. And it just changes the balance of the run game, where you're, in an ideal world, you have Rashawn and Zion on the left side, and Zion has his faults. We can talk about that, but he's a great run blocker. And then you have Mekhi Becton and Joe Alt on the other side. And it just gives you a real two-way release where you can run effectively both sides of the line. Now it's kind of just going to be pigeonholed to the left side, because Trey Pipkins is a solid pass protector, but run blocking has never really been his thing. So it changes the dynamics of the run game more so than the pass protection, which is obviously their big focus with, drafting Omarion and bringing in Najee Harris and all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on Zion Johnson? You just seemed like you were holding back there a little bit. Yeah.
There's been a real frustrating lack of development from him.
Mm-hmm.
He's a real weapon in the run game. Like, he really is, I would say, a very clearly above average run blocker. The things he can do athletically, climbing to the second level, executing reach blocks as a puller, like it makes it that much more frustrating that he struggles so much in pass protection, and specifically like identifying stunts, handling the games that happen on a consistent basis, because he's probably the smartest offensive lineman in the league in terms of like pure intelligence. Like, this guy can build a computer, and he's like, just super, super smart, but it hasn't translated to on the field, like football IQ.
Mm-hmm.
So if you just say, hey man, like, this is your assignment, he'll execute it, and he'll execute it really well. But if a team is kind of dictating terms to him, he has a really tough time in like adapting to what the other guys are throwing at him. So that was exposed in the playoffs by the Houston Texans. Again, credit to them. But because of his limitations as a pass protector, the Chargers are declining his 5th-year option. There's justifiably no talk about a contract extension. I know you and I have been on this segment before talking about how much we like Zion Johnson, the draft prospect. And unfortunately just has turned into him being essentially like an average guard, which is really disappointing.
Is there any Jamari Sawyer talk about him getting involved, or not so much? Like, do you see a world where if Pipkins is really struggling, they would reintroduce Sawyer as a tackle? Because I did see they have him listed as a tackle now. Or is he kind of out of the picture, do you think?
So before the Rashawn injury, they were talking about Jamari as exclusively a guard and exclusively a backup guard.
Okay.
For whatever reason, this team decided to head into the offseason, and they're just running back the Zion Johnson and Bradley Bozeman experience. There was like some mild quote unquote competition of Zion maybe switching to center, but that resulted in like 3 practices and 12 snaps in the preseason game, in the Hall of Fame game. But Jamari has always been a distant backup player for this specific regime. Even last year, like, there was chatter, in like February, March, that Jamari and Trey Pipkins were going to be competing for the right guard spot. And then after the very first practice of OTAs, Harbaugh was like, yeah, Trey Pipkins is our right guard. There was no competition ever for that right guard spot. And Jamari has lost some weight. He looks definitely more healthy. He's lost about 20 pounds, according to Ben Herbert, their strength coach. So he looks better, but he still is viewed pretty clearly as a backup right now for this team. Mekhi Becton is currently dealing with some kind of minor injury. We don't really know any specifics there. So he's been working with the first team offense because of that. But unless another injury happens, Jamari is going to be a backup. And so if everybody's healthy, Jamari is like your sixth offensive lineman, which he was last year as well. And he can play tackle in a pinch, but I think this regime would like him to play guard and only guard if possible.
Okay, great. Thank you for all of the deep info dump on the O-line. That's very useful, I think, for all of us.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about something a little bit more fun here. Keenan Allen is back. That happened this week. So yeah, how do you see him kind of being used here? I guess first role wise, and then what kind of like production expectations do you have for him?
Yeah, the role is going to be very interesting because the Greg Roman offense is a lot of vertical routes. It's a lot of play action, deep shots. Justin Herbert shattered his record for average depth of target this past season because that's what they want to do. They want to take the ball vertically, and I think they heading into the season with Mike Williams instead of Keenan Allen, they felt like they had the pieces to be able to do that. Drafting Trey Harris, Keandre Lambert-Smith, Quentin Johnson, I think they felt really good about that part of it. Now bringing in Keenan Allen, who he's always been able to play outside, but his best stuff is from the slot. And you can make the same kind of argument for Ladd, who is his best stuff is from the slot, but he can also play outside. So I'm definitely not expecting him to be like a jump ball X receiver. I don't know really how much he can do the deep play action stuff, but what I know is that this team desperately needs some help on third down from last season. Last season, they were 27th in the league in dropback success rate on third down specifically, because again, like Ladd was really the only option. If Ladd wasn't getting open, Herbert would throw the ball away, take a sack, whatever. And so they just needed some big help there. And then they were also like 23rd, I want to say, in rushing touchdown in red zone touchdown percentage. So having Keenan, who can do a lot of the choice routes, run a lot of the timing routes, create separation in those windows, that's where he's going to thrive. A lot of Chargers fans think it's just going to be like Keenan of old and he's going to come in and have 1,000 yards and all that. I don't really see that just based off of how much the drop off happened in Chicago and the volume of other players that are in this offense, from a skill standpoint. So I'm excited about it. I think he will be valuable to this offense. I think he can bring a lot of leadership to this offense, but I definitely am expecting more of like a, maybe like 500, 600 yard season, 4 or 5 touchdowns. And he's playing, 50% of the snaps instead of 90% of the snaps like he used to when he was in his prime.
Yeah. That I totally agree. I think that would be how he's most useful here. I do think back on like Chicago last year with young receivers, and he was kind of a drain there, like of not that Herbert's a young quarterback, but the young receivers, like, losing some of that explosiveness, trying to get too many mouths fed. What you don't want is them to try to make Keenan Allen, I think, what he was 3-4 years ago. I like the idea of how you broke it down as a third down kind of secondary option. Like, okay, is Ladd open? Like, let's keep feeding the offense through Ladd as long as it's working. But then, have the reliable chain mover on third down. And I don't want to lose those deep targets to the young guys either. So I'm curious to see how it works out. But if anyone's going to figure it out, that regime knows how to do it with him.
Yeah, I still think this is Ladd's room. I still think he's essentially like your excuse me. He's your receiver who's never going to leave the field, unless he's obviously like injured or whatever. And then the other guys kind of fill in after that. So Trey Harris has already developed a really nice like jump ball, back shoulder chemistry with Justin Herbert.
Nice.
So he's going to be replacing like the Mike Williams part of that aspect. Quentin Johnston, they're using primarily as like a Z who can do a lot of like the crossing routes, yak opportunities. Keandre Lambert-Smith is your vertical player who's having a fantastic training camp. Really, really fast, really explosive. And then Keenan and Ladd are essentially your guys who just create separation over the middle, win one-on-ones, win against zone. And I think while I question the ceiling of Keenan, I think it just kind of complements the room really well and does give them another reliable target who can create separation against man, which was a huge issue for them last year.
Yeah. Well, and all these guys are just secondary to Oronde Gadsden the second anyway. So
He's having a good camp too, man. He is.
Hell yeah.
I have made an argument that the Chargers tight end room is the most improved room on the team because, last year they tried to do the whole Hayden Hurst thing. It lasted like 4 games and then he got hurt. And credit to Will Dissly. He was not signed to be a pass catcher, but they got 500 yards out of him last year. So he's an excellent blocker, but that the pass catching was just not really his thing. So you bring in Tyler Conklin, who again is having a really strong camp, a lot of great rapport with Justin Herbert already, and then Rondé Gaston can do a lot of your vertical seam stretching opportunities as well. So again, that tight end room goes from only Will Dissly and Tucker Fisk and Scott Matlock to now Tyler Conklin or Rondé Gadsden, and it just kind of adds to the weaponry that this offense is going to be
totally.
able to have.
And that's Roman's comfort zone is some of those packages. I was stunned looking at 12 personnel last year. The Chargers were like, they were bottom 10 for sure, but they were maybe like 30th in 12 personnel. Does that sound wrong to you?
So they use tight ends a lot, but because they didn't have like good pass catching tight ends, they were not very good at it. So
they were like third in with a fullback out there in 12 personnel or 21 personnel, but
21 personnel, 22 personnel. They love to load the boxes, and they would do this concept. So they would bring in Dissly, Tucker Fisk, and Scott Matlock, and then they would have one receiver, and then they would like motion people out, and they would run 4 verts like with those guys. Yep. And Tucker Fisk, Will Dissly, and Scott Matlock are all over like 275 pounds. And there were a couple times where Herbert would just make like an insane throw. Like there was a Will Dissly touchdown against the Bengals where you just throw a laser and it doesn't matter how you're covering them. But then there are other times where they're running that, 4 receivers out against, quarters and against the Broncos. And you're like, what are you doing? And so now you sub in Tyler Conklin and Rondé Gadsden, and at least you have like good players running those routes. So
yeah. All right, one more question. Roster wise, is the LB2 spot? Denzel Perriman just got in some trouble with some illegal weapons in his car, and I was a little surprised that it seems that's kind of we're past that already. Maybe.
The charges were dropped there.
Yeah.
So he's in the clear with that. In terms of like, I assume you're trying to ask about Junior Colson specifically.
Yes.
Okay. So the Chargers entered training camp, and the starting duo was Deion Henley, who the Chargers feel like is going to take a massive leap forward this year. And based on what I saw in person, like I would agree with that. And then Denzel Perryman and Troy Dye, who played a lot last year for them, were rotating in as the second and third linebackers. Junior Colson, unfortunately, last year he missed the bulk of training camp with an appendicitis, and then he had a hamstring injury, and then he came back, and then he had an ankle injury. It never really felt like he was able to get his footing as a rookie, and unfortunately, that has really just kind of carried over into this season. I love Junior Colson as a prospect, and specifically for the Chargers, it was like, well, duh, like you bring in Jesse Minter, Jim Harbaugh, let's get them their best, defensive player from that year. And unfortunately, the player who I watched on tape has not really translated to the NFL. He looks like he's stuck in mud all game long. I know it was like a preseason Hall of Fame game, but watching how quickly Troy Dye was triggering on certain things versus Junior Colson was really sad, unfortunately. It just looks like he's not seeing things very well. He's not reacting to things very well. The team is saying all the right things. He's putting in all the work. He's watching the film. He's training his butt off. He's another one who like lost weight in the offseason and stuff like that. But I just don't think he's adjusted very well to the speed of the NFL. And I think he's just kind of, his head is spinning out there a little bit too much. So right now he's not even second. He's fourth, unfortunately. He'll make the roster. He'll play special teams. But I would be pretty nervous if he had to like go out and start, a meaningful NFL game right now, which is just unfortunate, man. Yeah. Some of these guys show great things on tape, and then the speed of the game is just, too much for them sometimes.
All right. All right. Last question. It's the same one I ask every guest. We're just going to try to keep the record of all of my guests together for picking the teams over under. So it is 9.5 for the Chargers this year. Are you going higher or lower?
Before the Slater injury, I would have said higher. I'm not expecting like the bottom to fall out by any means, but I just have a really hard time seeing this specific offense, with the offensive line issues without Slater being, an offense that can take that leap. The defense last year was exceeded expectations for sure, and Jesse Minter is wonderful, but they're playing a much more difficult schedule this year.
It's going to be hard to be as good as they were last year.
Yeah, last year
talent on the D line.
They're playing Spencer Rattler, and they're playing like all these other quarterbacks. They were Bryce Young's third game, I think.
I was at that game in person.
Yeah, that was the game where everybody was like, okay, Bryce Young is like done. And credit to him, he's back now.
Yeah.
Supposedly. So I just think like the offensive line's not going to be able to take a step. The defense is going to have a harder time. I think before the Slater injury, I was predicting, like 10-7, maybe 11-6 if you get some things to go well. But now without Slater, I think that comes down to 9-8, maybe 8-9 if like Mekhi Becton also misses time, or Khalil Mack misses any time, stuff like that is much. It's just the margins are a lot slimmer. So I'm gonna say sadly under, but I would still say like 9 and 8 is probably where I would end up at.
Yeah. All right. Very brave of you to take the under. I think only one other guest did it. I still have to go back and retally it all up, but
my brain just works logically like that. I can't just like, I would love to be like, yeah, 17-0, but I think too logically and maybe a little bit pessimistic, I guess. But
we caught you the day after the Rashawn Slater injury.
Yeah.
So if I ask you next Friday, maybe you'll be back on the hype train. Who knows?
Maybe next Friday they'll trade for like Rasheed Walker or something like that, and then we'll be back.
There you go. Yeah, just take our left tackle. All right, Steven, this was great. Pleasure as always. Everybody make sure you follow the Guilty as Charged podcast as well. And thank you for watching.
Appreciate it, Marcus.
So thank you to Steven for taking the time to come back for this Chargers deep dive. As promised, let's finish up by taking a look at the Chargers schedule, my win total projections on this team. Even though I have developed a little bit of a negative undertone with this team as the video has gone on, I do think you can end on a positive note with the Chargers here because their schedule is much easier than I frankly expected. Now, they begin against the Chiefs in Brazil, and they lose a home game for that. So that's certainly not ideal. But their next, 11 games, I've got them favored in all of them. Certainly not to say they're all gimmies. Like, you host Denver, they're a good team. You host Washington, they're a good team. You host Minnesota, they're a good team. Pittsburgh, we'll see what they are week 10. But you've got both of your games with the Raiders in there. I've got them big favorites. You go to the Giants, you go to the Dolphins, very winnable for this team. You host the Colts at Tennessee, at Jacksonville. There's your hope, Chargers fans.
You're asking us to invade an imperial installation based on nothing but hope.
And if you're able to come out in a weird Brazil environment and sneak up on the Chiefs, where it's not that that's an unwinnable game for them, it's just they're going to be probably, 5.5, 6-point underdogs in that game. But a divisional opponent, if you're able to steal that, you can get some real excitement that maybe you are talking about this team being 9-3 or 8-4 heading into the final 5 games of the season. You got a week 12 bye week too, so you get late season rest there. But then it gets real. You got Philadelphia coming to town. You got to go to Kansas City, at Dallas, Houston coming to town week 17. We saw what that defense did to these guys last year. And then at Denver week 18, which could be for some serious playoff stakes there. So the final 5 games get very, very real, very, very fast. But having an easy start to your schedule like that is definitely a breath of fresh air, knowing they're going to have some stuff to sort through with the Rashawn Slater injury. And I certainly, with what we saw from this team last year, am not willing to say that this team's going to scratch through, figure out some problems, and maybe even win some games that you didn't expect them to. So the math actually does have them going over on that 9.5 wins, and it's hard to look at the schedule and not see that. So at least there's that, Chargers fans. Love ending on a positive note there. Definitely a fun deep dive, at least to try to sort through all of this. Maybe not as fun for Chargers fans. Probably fun for Chiefs and Broncos fans. But let's be on our way here. Please do hit that like button on the way out. Let me know all your comments down below. What do you think of this new ranking for the Chargers? Does it feel right for you? Too high, too low? Who do you think comes next with what will be the 11th spot in these power rankings? We will be back within the next few days with that one. Until then, thank you for watching, and I'll see you later. Cheers.